Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 6, 2023 Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Catalina, if you can do roll call.
Yes. Item number 1, roll call. Commissioner Fay?
Here.
Commissioner Kadikian?
Here.
Commissioner Lori?
Here.
President Jasmadarian?
Here.
I'm sorry. And for the record, Commissioner Peterson will not be attending tonight's meeting. Next item is 2, GWP Commission staff comments.
So the first comment we'd like to make is moving the oral communications up before the reports for information so that anyone who wants to say something can fill out a card, and if they don't want to stay for the rest of the meeting, they don't need to. The oral communications is only for those items that are not on the agenda. Items on the agenda, you still need to fill out a card for that, but then we will take your comments during the agenda item. Right, so,
I don't have any cards, and there are no phone calls.
okay.
I have no comments.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, it's with deep sadness that I'd like to announce the passing of Larry Morehouse. He passed away on October 12th. Larry was a 20-year employee, superintendent of the Grayson Power Plant, and he'll be sorely missed.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments?
President Jasmadarian, if the commission could call oral communications as the next item, since the commission announced that it would like to take it prior to the reports. That way, on the record, it'll be oral communications as item number 3, and then reports and information follow.
Okay. So can we please have oral communications next?
Our next item is 3, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Commission may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The agenda manager may refer the matter to the appropriate staff for investigation and report.
Any?
For the record, we don't have any phone calls or cards.
Okay, thank you. Next item?
Our next item is 4, reports. 4A, customer service update.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm sorry. Is this on? Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Crystal Nonate, Customer Service Utility Supervisor. Today, I'll be reviewing the utility bill timeline as it relates to due dates and reminder notices. I'll be talking about delinquent accounts and the options available to customers who need additional time to pay their bills. I will also be touching on customer service disconnections and the impact that process has on our customers, followed by an overview on the various payment methods available, and last but not least, our customer service statistics. The utility bill timeline is as follows. After the bill is issued, payment is due 19 days thereafter, which is the 20th day. If payment is not received, a friendly reminder notice is issued 3 days after that due date, which is the 23rd day. Customers are given an additional 14 days from the reminder notice to pay their bill, which is day 37. Here again, if payment is not received, a final disconnect notice is issued the following day, which brings us to day 38. At this point, A late fee is assessed on the account, which is $15 or 1.5%, whichever is greater. After the final notice is issued, customers are given an additional 6 days to pay their bills. This brings us to day 44. If payment is not received, the utility account becomes eligible for disconnection the following day, which is now day 45 from the date the bill was originally issued. Delinquent accounts. Now, for delinquent accounts, accounts are considered delinquent if payment is not received by the bill due date, which is 19 days after the date it was issued. Customers have the option of requesting payment arrangements if they require additional time to pay their bills. The payment arrangement option is advertised on the reverse side of the bill and all notices, in addition to the GWP website, staff, and our telephone system. We are generous with granting payment arrangements upon request. The chart below shows the amount of payment arrangements we have granted over the last few years. There was a huge decrease that started in 2019, 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the volume started to pick up in 2023 after we resumed the disconnections for non-payment in January. We continue to refer customers to the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, for financial assistance. LIHEAP is a long-standing state-funded program that is geared towards helping customers with their energy bills, even at the point where the service has already been disconnected. The chart below shows the number of payments we have received over the years. The total dollar amount we've received continues to increase. For example, last fiscal year, the increase from the previous year was 31%. Now for service disconnections. Interrupting customer services is never our first option, not only because of the amount of time that they are given to pay their bills, but also because of the options available to them. So accounts are eligible for disconnection 45 days after the bill was issued, if payment wasn't received. It is not the best interest for the customer to wait until the service is disconnected because of the additional fees that are assessed. In addition to the late fee that was already charged to the account after the final notice was issued, when the account service is interrupted, a disconnection of $25 is charged to the account, along with an additional fee to reconnect the service, which ranges between $25 and $50. Depending if we can restore the service remotely or if a field visit is necessary. Additionally, a security deposit may also be required. We urge customers to contact us as soon as possible to request a payment arrangement or contact LIHEAP for further assistance. The chart to the right shows that about 98% of our customers who are disconnected make payments within 24 hours. In contrast, when the disconnection notice is issued, only 23% of customers pay within the 6 days. In the next 2 slides, we will be looking at our payment methods. There are 9 different ways for customers to make their payments for their utility bills, as shown on this first slide. 6 of which allow us to receive the payments electronically. One is via our website. They can set up automatic payments where the bills are instantly paid on the due date. Home banking through their own financial institutions. Make payments through our automated telephone system. The telephone number is on all of our bills and notices. Pay at any 7-Eleven store, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also accept ACH and wire payments. Customers can also mail their payments to our processing center. They can choose to walk into our office and pay at our counter or cashier window. And lastly, we have the kiosk that is located close to the cashier window. This graph shows that most of our payments are received electronically. For example, this first quarter shows that 77%, as reflected in the blue bar, is electronically. About 16% is through the processing center, which is reflected in the green bar, and about 6% is processed by our cashiers for walk-in customer payments in the orange. This slide shows our call performance. We answered about 95% of the total calls offered this last fiscal year, and we are at 93% for this quarter. Of our customer contacts we received through the web, we have been addressing an average of 95% within 48 hours. And we handled 93% for this quarter. In breaking this down a little further, we've handled 89% within 24 hours in this first quarter. We do treat customer contacts received through the web with the same sense of urgency as our telephone contacts. These graphs clearly show that customers prefer to interact with us. As you can see, for this first quarter, 55% of the overall contacts were handled over the telephone, 32% in office, and 13% were web contacts. If you were to compare the percentages on both graphs, the results are pretty much the same for last year and this first quarter. As a footnote, about 51% of our customers are registered on our MyGWP web portal. We do advertise our portal on our utility bills, notices, over the phone, in our welcome email to customers, and in our newsletter. Thank you, Commissioners. This concludes my presentation today.
Great. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Crystal, thanks for that report, and thank you for adding some more context about the ways that our customers interact with GWP. I had a couple questions for you about the different bill pay methods. So it might be helpful to go back to that slide.
Sure.
It looked like there were about 3 kind of outlier methods that aren't really very popular. And so I'm wondering if those make sense to continue supporting, or, you know, what are our fixed costs for supporting Pay Near Me, the ACH method, and the kiosk method? You know, if we have some fixed costs to offer those to customers, but no one's really using them, maybe we should get rid of them. You know, if we did, what would those clients use instead? So I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, for the ACH payments, to be quite honest, those are typically used by our large customers, our large commercial customers. So they are very small. Those are electronically sent in directly into the city's bank. So it's a win-win situation there. In regards to the kiosk is fairly new. We are working on adding more features to our kiosk. Currently, it only accepts cash and electronic checks. We are working now to include credit card payments, which we're hoping that will increase its activity. Sure. So when a customer receives their utility bill, on the back of the stub, there is the logo for 7-Eleven with a direct linking code for us. They can go to any 7-Eleven store with their stub to make a payment on their utility bill. The customer does absorb the cost of $1.49 per transaction for paying their bill, but the customer pays that portion.
Okay, so ACH doesn't cost us anything. That just goes straight to our bank.
Correct.
And it's probably a relatively small number of transactions, but relatively higher value transactions,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. And Pay Near Me, it sounds like, doesn't cost us anything. Is there any administrative burden to supervise that, or?
Yeah, I don't believe there is, no. As far as the Pay Near Me, it's mainly a convenience for the customer.
So these would be customers that maybe would have to come to the counter here at the office, but instead they can go somewhere closer to home.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And they're paying the convenience fee for that, so.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. Or if they don't want to use our telephone system is 24 hours a day. If they're preferring to pay cash for that transaction, then they have the option to go to 7-Eleven.
Gotcha. And what's the timeline on upgrading the kiosk? And is the idea the kiosk reduces the staff time at the counter to accept payments in person, or who's the kiosk targeting?
It's targeting our lines in the lobby to ensure that customers have that option instead of waiting for the cashier to process a transaction. And as far as the credit card feature of it, we are currently working on it. I'm hoping in the next month or two, we are able to offer the credit card piece to the kiosk.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be great to see if that makes it more popular.
Yes, absolutely.
And then across all of these different categories, do we have a sense of what our transaction costs are to process these payments electronically? Are they all the same? Is there some variable cost there? Would it be in our interest as utility to shift more customers to just do the MyGWP, recurring payments, or how do you feel about that?
Well, it would be great. I think it's definitely less cost for us if customers were to pay with automatic payment
Okay.
versus credit card where we absorb that cost.
Maybe next time we review this, we get some numbers about how much it costs us to process those and think about some way to kind of drive that metric.
Okay.
One thing I've seen from other kind of utility services that I have, like cable company or internet, is they say, oh, save $5 a month for the next 3 months if you switch to auto pay and stay enrolled. Maybe there's some kind of promotion we do, or it's just a matter of marketing. But it seems like the trend is going that direction anyway, and maybe we can nudge it along and save some money.
Yeah, currently we don't offer anything like that. It's just our marketing on pushing the service. But thank you. I will definitely take that into consideration for next presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is 4B, Building and Fleet Electrification Impacts in Infrastructure.
Good afternoon, Commission members. My name is Dan Scorza. I'm the Chief Assistant General Manager for Glendale Water and Power Electric. And I'm here to talk to you about something I think everybody is interested in, is the building and fleet electrification. And I kind of added a second item on here. It's impacts on the infrastructure. And I hope to go through these slides real quickly. It's sort of a tutorial. You guys can go back and review the slides. There's a lot of information. I'm not going to cover it in the presentation, but it's there for you to review and think about it, and even make comments and things where we can consider and see where we can improve our processes as well. You see here? Okay. So January 1st, we passed the REACH codes, and this REACH code goes into making sure that all new construction was all electric. It also has requirements for EV charging and also providing solar at the buildings and facilities. Here's a generic layout of what can be electrified. It's basically the entire house. I know some of the commission members have already done some of this improvements and used the technology, so it's well proven. And this REACH code kind of enforces that. One of the things, to give you a little bit of history, when they were developing the REACH codes, the consultant the city hired went back and to look at the Cal Green voluntary standards. Some of the things to point out, if we notice the multifamily hotels and motels, it talks about 20 spaces, greater than 20 spaces. Those numbers are kind of important, the 40%, the 15%. You'll see what the Glendale REACH code actually does. It actually has a much higher standard to follow. Again, just the summary, the REACH code looks at electrifying new construction, expanding local solar generation, and increasing EV capacity. There are some things that also provisions for exclusions, invisibility waivers. So that's kind of discussed in this slide. You can read it afterwards. But it gives you an ability, if in case there is no technology that would replace, say, natural gas usage and stuff, this will give you a mechanism to at least apply for a waiver. Again, these are slides and information from the actual ordinance that came out. So I kind of put it here on the slide for you to refer to. It's also on the website that I referred to on the slides. Here's an important one. This is the one with electrification, and it's the EV charging. And you notice that items I and II talk about the spaces, less than 20, more than 20. But notice it says 50% of all parking spaces, with an additional 5, and then there's an additional 20% there for the less than 20, and then above 20, it's 50% plus 15% plus an additional 10. So it's almost at the level of 75. So 50% is the minimum. It can go up as high as 75% of all parking spaces for units that have 20 dwellings or more. So that's the important change on our electrification REACH code, that it did go beyond what the standards were for the state. So this is what Glendale did. This is the, I think, one of the biggest cities in the county, if not the state, to put the REACH codes at this level. I think UC Berkeley was the first one to push this. So an interesting thing happened there as well. Let's go back just to talk about the EV charging. So this is what EV chargers kind of look like today, the technologies. Level 1, that's basically your wall plug. It consumes about 2 kilowatts. The middle one is the important one. That's what a lot of the requirements on the REACH code call out to be installed. It's about a 7 kilowatt load. By the way, a 7 kilowatt load is equivalent to a house. A house currently in Glendale, 7 kilowatt is about the average size of a house of consumption. If you will notice, people, when they put solar in their roofs, they get about a 7 kilowatt system because that's what they consume. And our current rules, or our past rules, were that you would get a solar system to match your load. We currently raised that November 1st. You can get up to 10 kilowatts, no questions asked. So you can go up higher than the your actual consumption. So that's something we've added. And then I talk a little bit about the level 3 chargers. These are the new level 3 chargers that Tesla is installing. If you can see, it's a big jump. Why is it so high? It's high because you want to be able to charge the vehicle quickly. That's something that they're striving for. 250 isn't the biggest. The biggest ones are 350 kilowatts each. Those are like the Electrify America, VW pushes that. And the reason they do that is they might not have the range of a Tesla, the Porsches and VWs, but what they do charge very quickly. And so that's a big plus for people traveling and being not stuck at a charging station. So anyways, this gives you just the overview of the charging technologies out there. I go over some numbers here. There's a lot of information. But basically, one of the things I was kind of focusing on is, in charge of having a distribution system and a transmission system that would be able to support all this infrastructure for electrification. I did notice, one of the things, we have about 25,000 single-family homes in Glendale. We have about 73,000 households and a population of 200,000. But the households are important. Basically, if eventually, the idea would be that each household will have a 7 kilowatt charger in their home, in their garage. That's I would think the end game of one of the things, because you come home, you want to be able to charge your vehicle. Well, if you multiply 7 kilowatts by 25,000, again, 7 kilowatts is sort of the average. There are a little bit higher wattage level 2 chargers, but that's about 175 megawatts more. And I put by 2035 with a question mark, being that that's the year that the state will not allow any new internal combustion engine cars to be sold. Will we be there? We're not sure, but there's a potential of increase on load, about 175 megawatts, just by adding a 7 kilowatt charger in everybody single-family homes. Remember, there's 73,000 households in Glendale. The other one would be the level 3 charger. You know, I don't know what the right number is for Glendale, but eventually I would think, you know, 1,000 isn't unreasonable, 1,000 chargers throughout the entire city. But again, 1,000 chargers at 250 kilowatts would come out to 250 megawatts. Again, it may be a combination of these two, and I'll show you later on what new buildings we're adding into Glendale that are in the planning process. But basically, GWP will become the energy resource, the refinery, the gas station, and the gas company. Again, this is for your going back and reviewing these numbers. Again, hypothetical numbers, but we can see the potential of load growth. What I'm seeing is that there's probably going to be a doubling of load in Glendale, and that would imply a doubling of infrastructure, doubling of generation, more resources, and then again, probably a rate impact as well associated with this. Here's some news. I guess the Restaurant Association in Berkeley challenged the electrification reach codes that Berkeley passed. So as of May, this is the information I got, the latest one was from October 18th. They've put the reach codes on hold because it's being challenged on the Ninth Circuit Court. Again, I don't know all the legal ramifications. It has to do with the local agencies setting up and challenging federal standards, because the federal standards include natural gas devices. And there was some challenge in that form. Anyways, these were two things that I had gotten in emails from descriptions of what's going on with the current reach codes. So as of May, we kind of have our reach codes on place. We have them, but it can't be legally challenged or enforced for now. But there are, it's going back to court, it's being appealed, so that we're still waiting for the final outcomes of this. So I just wanted to just inform the commission on this. So remember I said I was going to talk a little bit about the electrification and the buildings. So here's a look ahead of some of the big projects we have. The reason I'm concerned about these projects is that these are multiple unit buildings, and you can see the numbers there. What I have to do here is that I have to give them a level 2 charger. So it's 7 kilowatts times the number of apartments times either 50% or 75% of this number. So there's a huge amount of load that will be added to our system. This is the load here only for the buildings. It's about 35.8. Not all these projects will occur during the time frame. Again, these are planned. It takes multiple years to finish these projects because these are major developments. But remember, on top of that, now we would add the reach code requirements, which would add another 50 to 75% of that load to this electrical requirement. So when we build our system out, we have to build that infrastructure in place. Because that's what the customer will come and pay us for it. They'll say, okay, hey, I'm meeting the reach codes. I need this panel. I need it at this rating because I'm going to have the building plus all the EV chargers in its place. Please provide us that panel and power to be able to do that work, electrical work to charge. Okay, so this gives you a number there to see. On top of that, Glendale has a large fleet. And these numbers are sort of projections of what we estimate. I've gotten this from our different departments. Again, it's not final, but in total, there's about 828 electric vehicles. Some are larger vehicles, some are smaller, but again, 828 vehicles will have to be charged at our facilities. And you know, one of the things that happened, and I think I've discussed this with the commission, you know, we get the different departments coming to GWP saying, well, we already bought the infrastructure. So we're ready. And so I asked him, what do you mean infrastructure? Well, we're buying the chargers and the vehicles. And I said, well, what about the modifications to your facility? Because you got to have the wires coming in. If you were a private company, you would come to us and say, hey, I'm building this parking lot. I want to charge 200 vehicles on here. Hey, GWP, please provide me the service for it, the wires in the ground, the modifications to the distribution system to allow that to happen. So here, this is just the vehicles. The modifications of it haven't been accounted for yet. We were estimating around $21 million, $25 million to do that. But again, until we actually build it and engineer it, we won't know the actual costs. But we are planning, looks like now, for 828 vehicles. That was the numbers we were given. And so this is part of that planning process. The other thing on top of that is that there's a city bus fleet as well. There's about 104 buses. Now, about 58 of them are electric, so about 60, let's say. The rest are hydrogen buses, but I'm not sure if the hydrogen infrastructure will be built out at that time. They may go electric with it. And the reason I say that, I'll have another slide where I talk about the different technology and the efficiency of electric vehicles versus hydrogen versus internal combustion engines. Just to show that it is right to have electrical reach codes. Electricity is the solution to a lot of the issues that we're facing with climate change, but to understand that the utilities would need the infrastructure and resources to be able to provide this. So it's about 104 buses in total. And again, by 2045, by 2050, that was some of the projections I've seen. I included this slide. This comes from the Lawrence Livermore Lab in UC Berkeley. This is a model of the energy consumption in the United States. It's all energy, including all thermal, electrical, renewable. It's interesting, it comes out to around 97 quads. 2021 was the latest one when I was preparing the slides. There should be a new one for 2022. It wasn't out yet by the time I was preparing the slides. But if you notice the 100 quads, there's an equivalent kilowatt hour number to these quads, and it's a big number. But the quads are pretty good because if it's 100%, then those numbers give us the percentage. It's interesting to see here is that when you use thermal energy, 66% of it turns out to be unusable. It's waste heat, only 31%. So in general, we can say thermal energy is only 33% efficient, and there's about 66% losses. Interestingly enough, transportation shows in this chart, it's about 21% efficient and 71% losses. So is there room for improvement by electrifying? Yes, there is. So this is a wonderful chart. This is what the United States is a snapshot of how energy is used. It's a wonderful chart, again, from a reputable organization, right? Government organization that does this, experts in the field. So let's see what happens. And this is, I think, what Mr. Musk and Tesla talks about. He kind of looks at the efficiency of transportation. The reason I focus on this is where we can really improve. So electrification, charging vehicles is correct. If you look at the technologies, the end result when you generate energy and then get it to the car to be used on the wheels, here's the efficiencies that you get. Electric vehicles are about 77 to 81% efficient versus internal combustion engines, 16 to 18. Is there a big gain? Yes, there is. Electrifying is the solution here. So we can improve to 77% efficient by electrifying and using electric vehicles. Notice here, they also have hydrogen. Even though hydrogen is a clean technology, to get the hydrogen from either water or natural gas, there's energy being spent. And then you have to transmit the energy to a device that converts the hydrogen to electricity. That's normally done by a fuel cell. There's an efficiency loss there as well. So at the end, what you end up is with 33 to 42% efficiency. Elon Musk always talks about this. This is when he pushes his Tesla vehicles. But he's absolutely right. The direct electrification, going from electricity directly into the battery to the motor of the car, is the most efficient way of transmitting energy. So it's correct to electrify. This kind of validates our reach code. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to fix this. The other thing is that the internal combustion engines, right, today are the, I think, biggest CO2 emitters. They're about 42% or higher in terms of emissions of CO2 into the atmosphere. By electrifying electrifying transportation, and using renewable resources, you cut down on the emissions, you cut down on CO2 emissions. So it's a great thing. So I want to kind of end the slides here. And so I say electrification is the solution. Electricity is the most efficient way to transmit energy. The way we transmit energy, there's no moving parts. Transmission, distribution, batteries, transformers are 90+% efficient. You don't get that in the mechanical world. In the thermal world, there's the mechanical things. You will never approach that level of efficiency. In electricity, you do. We can see that transportation can become 77% efficient by electrifying it. So electrification is to gain efficiency and reduce GHG emissions. But utilities need the resources if they will become the energy resource, the refinery, the gas company, and the gas station, right, of the future. So we do need that. And then here I just summarized what the REACH codes have. And that's my presentation. It's something for you to study. And if you have any questions, please, you can ask me questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Scorza. Any questions?
Go ahead. No, you. All right. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Scorza. Well, I mean, this is kind of what is coming, and we, at least the commission members, see it coming and knew what was coming on. And certainly, the obligations or the responsibilities of GWP is going to be expanding as they deliver and become the gas station and what have you. And certainly, you need the funding to be able to do that. And one way of securing that funding is also discussing where customers are saving money or where are not spending money. So if they're electrifying their cars, they're not spending on gas. So there's a certain amount of shift of cost from one source of energy over to you, and that's fine. But the point I'm trying to make is when you indicate these things are coming and we need the funding, we should also mention to them, but you're not spending there. And it's going to be
Yes.
more efficient with us. So
Yes.
it's kind of like we should sell ourselves with the idea of, trying to improve in a more cost-effective way. Exactly what Elon Musk says all the time, trying to do more with less. That's how he sells more. Of course, he wants to sell cars, and he's correct in cars being most efficient, but there's a better, more efficient way is not driving cars and working from home, which he is against. So that's maybe he wants to sell his cars. That's fine. But those are my comments.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Good comments.
Thank you, Dan, very much. I thought that was great. Just a few random questions here. With regard to the REACH codes, those all apply to new construction. That's correct?
That's right. It's new construction, but the idea is that eventually everything would be electric. I mean, that's the end goal.
Right.
So eventually, if I guess if you improve the homes and stuff, it may have an implication of, that you have to upgrade your house, make it all electric and stuff. And there may be an instance, like we said, if there's efficiency gains, there's money to be saved, of course you'll do it, so.
Right. Regarding the EV chargers, and I noticed on the slide it said the EV chargers in the garage needed to be ready for EVs. Can you describe what that means? I mean, that doesn't mean that the charger is installed, it's just wired to accept a charger at some point?
Yes. So it may mean that for the homeowner, but as a utility, when somebody tells me, Mr. Scorza, I'm going from a 100 amp panel to 200 amps, that's fine. I don't install the wires inside the house, I don't install the charger. But on the utility side, I have to make provisions for now a 200 amp panel where a 100 amp panel existed. Or if they go from 200 amps to 400 amps, or from 1,000, 2,000, or 2,000 to 5,000 amps. On the utility side, I have to put in the infrastructure to support that, because that's what they'll be paying me for upgrading their service. So even though they might not install it that day. On the utility side, they're paying me to provide that level of power delivery. So that's sort of the distinction where I kind of look at it, because I'm not concerned what they do inside the house. They may put it in and never use it. But as a utility, when they pay me to provide that panel size, I have to put the infrastructure in place. So that's the way I kind of look at it. EV ready, EV capable. There was some language in there, but normally if you're going to put it, you're going to use it. And electric vehicles are coming. It's not that it's not going to be used. So I kind of look at it as though it is going to be used, but it doesn't make a difference for the utility side. I have to put the infrastructure in on the utility side anyways, because that's what they would be paying me for. It doesn't negate that the panels system and infrastructure will be there. It has to be there, and that's what they're paying me for.
Okay, so if somebody builds a 10-story apartment building and it has, obviously parking for all the tenants, how many chargers do they need to put in? I mean,
According to the REACH code, anywhere from 50 to 75%. That's the way it's written in the code. I took it verbatim. So it's got 50% at least, and then there's an additional 15 and an additional 10. So whatever load there is, that's multiplied by about 7 kilowatts or so. The actual calculation, the building designers, engineers will give us that calculation and will provide the service according to their design. But that's the REACH codes that they're going to be meeting. I don't know if Mark has a comment on that, or...
I don't. I think he did a very good job of explaining it. If somebody has a 400 amp panel, we as a utility has to assume that they will use 400 amps. And that's the big deal about the REACH codes. And I think single family homes are important. I think it's the multifamily homes that are even more important, because if you have 50 parking spaces that you have to then use a level 2 charger, that could be substantial. So we could have a substation feeder dedicated to one building only. Yeah. That's how big it is. So the infrastructure is huge.
Right. On the supercharger applications, you were saying that you could envision 1,000 of those being installed in the city. Would those typically be in like hotels, shopping centers, things like, I mean, nobody's going to put one of those in their, well, I mean, not nobody, but most people would not look to put a supercharger in their home.
Yeah, so at least from my experience, we do have some at the Americana, the local parking lot here by across the Americana. There's about 20 level 3 chargers. And they were the standard that Tesla had. I think they're in the range of, 100 something, 150 in that range. Original level 3 chargers were at 50 megawatts. But the new standard is 250. Why? Because you want to be able to charge the vehicles in 15 minutes. You have huge batteries now in vehicles. Why huge batteries? Because of the range on the newer vehicles. The Rivians have 125 kilowatt hours. Model S has a 100 kilowatt hour battery. The Lightning has a 130 kilowatt hour battery. So huge batteries. And remember, you're putting 7 kilowatts at a level 2. So it's that number divided by 7. That's how many hours it would take for it to charge. Because they're huge batteries, again, for range, to extend the range of these vehicles. Level 3s are when you're traveling, right? And you want to charge as soon as possible and get on your way. So will they go in a lot of buildings? No, most likely it'll be supercharging park. Tesla comes to us and puts some, I think 10 or 20 at once. But eventually, that's going to replace the gas stations. That's why I envision 1,000, even if it's at 50%, 500 of them. It's a huge number. And they're 250 kilowatts. And the other level 3 chargers are from Electrify America. Again, they're looking to charge cars up 15 minutes or less. Right. And again, it takes a lot of power to do that. And those are the concerns we have as a utility. We would provide it. It's just that again, we would have to make plans for it. The infrastructure would increase. The other thing that happens, just so that you guys understand, utility, as it ages, it has to be replaced. So remember, if we're doubling the size of the utility, not only do I have to replace existing infrastructure, now I have to double the size. So there's huge pressures on getting equipment, upgrading things, planning all this out. So it's not a simple thing. And if you were to ask me, well, Dan, can you put a cost to it? Well, I have to see what vehicles are going to come. I have to see like these plans for new buildings. As we have that there, now we can plan out which substations need upgrades. How many more feeders do we add? How many more substations do we add? And again, now what's happening, Mark could tell you this, and Scott, the getting electrical equipment. There's 2 years to get transformers now. It's kind of crazy. There's a huge backlog. And so all these have to be planned, and the costs have gone up. So it's yes, it can be done. We look forward, we are up to the challenge, but it is challenging to do all this. That's why the reach codes are sort of a challenge to a utility.
Sure. Regarding the Berkeley thing, and you said the restaurant association, they just don't want to stop cooking with gas?
I'm not exactly sure, but it sure sounds like it. It had to do with it's sort of also, they're kind of challenging it because these reach codes are tying into federal standards. If you look at federal standards, they put out stuff that you should buy, that these are efficient, and gas stoves, gas appliances are listed there.
Right.
So you're sort of going into the federal realm to regulate stuff. And I don't understand all the legal implications, but the understanding right now is that we can't enforce it until that's decided upon.
Sure. Regarding the electric buses, or the buses, are we buying electric buses now?
I think so. In public works, there's and I think there's funding. There's either state or federal funding to buy some of these different transportation, either buses or vehicles that they use. But the money they have is for that type of coverage. It doesn't cover, like I said, the infrastructure, but it looks like that's what they're buying. Those were the numbers that I had seen in presentations from Public Works to us as we were asking them, what are you guys looking in the future to do? So again, eventually what it looks like is that the city will be operating 1,000 vehicles. And again, depending on the range, and then when do we charge those? And do we have to charge them midday as well? So we'll have to see. But these vehicles have greater range. They put the large batteries in them so that you don't have, you can run them all day and you just charge them at night. Or you charge them when they're not supposed to be, when the bus line isn't supposed to be there. Again, we won't know exactly until that time comes. We'll have some idea. We're putting 200-300 EV chargers. That's great because that we can kind of plan for. We're doing some of it. We have some of the customers. But when the numbers come huge like this, when you have multiple projects, commercial, governmental, it's a big burden because it may come very quickly. And right now, from what I hear from the automobile manufacturers and equipment, they're not sure how much they're going to be building. There may be a slowdown. So we'll have to see. And then the state has its own numbers of what they predict to be the number of vehicles in the state, and then you allocate a certain number to the city. But again, it's not clear. It's something we won't know until we get closer to that period of time. But this is something we're looking at, and it's on our radar.
Okay. Will the buses be vehicle to grid capable?
Some may have that option. Right now, it wasn't accounted for in that fashion. That's one of the studies that we do. We look at our feeders, our wires basically, how much they can handle. They were designed to have power flow in one direction. So now we're being challenged when we have solar, which goes in the opposite direction. Normally it would cancel out, but there may be points where you have too much and you have to break them apart and add new feeders and add new substation equipment. Would they have vehicle to grid? it's funny, just my experience. I've worked in LA before. So LA has about 200 facilities. It was hard enough to handle 200 facilities that you would control the power flow from them. Glendale has 14. We still have struggle with substations. I can't imagine if we have thousands or several hundred thousands of equipment that we have to then control. It's sort of a cloud-based thing. It can be done. I don't know how robust it would be, but it's probably a probabilistic model of what you could get. They'll probably try some, and as the technology matures, then it could be used to do a virtual power plant. And I think that's the hope. But right now, the issue also deals with, if you're an EV owner, would you like your battery to be discharged and charged? Because it takes life away. I mean, it's an expensive proposition anyways.
If you'll pay me enough money, I will.
Okay, that's a good point, yeah. So we'll have to see where the economics make sense, and also the reliability. But if the technology is there, why not for a utility to use that? You know, so we're not against any of that technology.
Sure.
Commissioner Lowry, Public Works is looking at the possibility of doing vehicle to grid, but they're also coming to grips with, if we have a major issue, a major problem inside the city, we still want to be able to utilize those buses, because the people that are using those buses would be relying on those buses. So they're talking about decreasing the frequency at which those buses run in order for us to be able to do a vehicle to grid component. But there is talk about doing that. And it's the Beeline buses that they're talking about electrifying.
Right. I was just thinking you were projecting 828 vehicles. As you say, that could be the start of a real nice virtual power plant in itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the enthusiastic presentation. I'm glad we're looking ahead and being strategic about this, because it is going to come our way whether we want it to or not. This is definitely the right way to respond to climate change, by electrifying buildings and vehicles. And there's a lot of federal money supporting this. So for the next decade at least, there's maybe tens of thousands of dollars per household to support solar, batteries, electric vehicles, home electrification. So it's expensive, but there's help to pay for it. And I think this is a good moment for us to encourage our customers to take advantage of that help. I think I would agree that there's going to be big impacts on our infrastructure, and we're going to have to build a lot to support all this. But I don't think we should assume that building more is the only way to respond to this challenge. It's not just more wires and more poles and more feeders. I think there's probably a way to do it smarter. One thing that was in the REACH code language, there's an acronym ALMS that was not really spelled out, but that's a load management system. And so, given that and the ability to be smarter, I just want to take issue a little bit with one premise in your slide that we're going to have a linear build out of infrastructure to support more and more vehicles. That's not necessarily the case. If you have an apartment building with 50 EVs, they may all come home from work at the same time, but they don't all need to start charging at the same time. So they don't have an additive load in terms of kilowatts on the grid. They can be sequenced so that car 1 charges, then car 2 charges, car 3 charges. And also, it's very rare for an electric vehicle to be fully empty and charged to 100% full, right? Usually you're just topping up 20 or 30 miles you drove that day. So I think we need to be careful when we're throwing around numbers around, oh, the sky's falling, we're going to have all this massive infrastructure, because if we're smart about it, we can manage that. We can encourage property owners to manage that in terms of their vehicle charge management systems. And I also think that at the single family home level, you talked about panel upgrades. We could instead say, customer, instead of upgrading from 100 amps to 200 amps, you get a 100 amp smart panel that's going to manage your own load within your house, so that if you're charging your electric car, you're not also running your clothes dryer, or your water heater cycling off, right? Or you only charge your car when your air conditioning's not running, right? We should present that as an option to customers and give them the choice. You can pay us however much it costs to upgrade the infrastructure, or buy yourself a span panel that can do it all for you. So I think we should be thoughtful about that. Okay. And when we continue this conversation about building electrification and vehicles, I hope we can all kind of keep that flexibility in mind. So I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that, or how much we can rely on these kind of smart charging solutions or energy management systems to help us?
No, that sounds good. It's just that, when you go to a supercharger site and stuff, and you plug in your car, the idea is that you're thinking you're going to be there for 15 minutes and charge the car and get out. If you're the only car, yeah, that probably will happen. But if there are multiple cars, today we use that software to kind of divide the load, and so it takes longer to charge. So maybe the expectation to customers should also be explained that, okay, it's a level 2, but if there's other cars there, you're not going to be charging at that level. You might have to wait, or, and that happens less at people's homes. Like you said, you can put the smart panel in there that can charge your car if it's needed, and then not use it for clothes drying or the water heater or the air conditioner. So that's where I have sort of the dilemma. If I wanted, I'm paying for a panel upgrade to be able to get that power. As a utility, we could put the infrastructure in to provide it, but like you said, it's a big burden then. Then truly you have to double the size of the utility to do that. You could manage it with the software, that is true, the hardware that's there, but it's, again, it's something that customers have to sort of request and be educated on. And if they're willing to accept that, then we could provide it that way. That's why the final designs on buildings and homes aren't based on these numbers. It is what they give us as a final design. So their electrical contractor or architect or engineer would say, this is what we need, and that's what we will provide. So this will go back and forth. And not only will it include the electric vehicles, but a solar system, a battery system, electric kitchen. So it has to be all taken as a whole. And as we say, things are expensive, some of these devices, but if they can apply for grants or incentives or tax incentives, why not? So we'll work with the customers, but we'll work with the different designs. So yeah, good suggestions, by the way, and yeah, the software does exist. It's just that it will change what the expectation would be, because they're told a certain number, you won't get that. It'll be a little
and I
bit
think
longer.
that's the future that we all need to adapt to, is that you probably can't turn on every device in your house at the same time at full speed, right? You're gonna have to make some choices. Usually, you're not drying your clothes and cooking dinner and charging your car and running the air. You don't usually do all those things at the same time. So I think in practice, there'll be very little impact on customers' comfort or convenience, because a lot of this stuff just happens behind the scenes. So yeah, I just want to encourage us to try and figure out ways to utilize our existing resources better. And this may have a beneficial impact on our total costs and our rates, because if we can figure out ways to sell more kilowatt hours without increasing our total kilowatt capacity, we'll get better utilization out of the system. And I think a lot of these loads are complementary in terms of the time when they're used. So let's just think about it a little bit more creatively, and that's like, there may be a solution here. This might actually help us solve our problems of increasing rates. If we could get all of the revenue that our Glendale residents are currently sending to the Middle East through gas stations and to the gas company through their home heating, if all that revenue could come here, that would help us cover a lot of our costs. So I think there's a great opportunity here. One other thing I wanted to mention along the same lines was, as we're looking at public charging, whether it's GWP-owned facilities that we've invested in or privately owned facilities that we're connecting to, there is a technology that allows you to get a level 3 charge out of a level 2 infrastructure connection, and that's with a battery buffered charging. So there's a stationary battery in the charger that can charge slow and discharge fast. And I think that would be a great way, especially if we have short-term grid constraints where customer wants to provide public EV charging, but we can't get the transformers or the switchgear, or we can't get the cables in the ground fast enough. They could take that approach and maybe use their existing electric infrastructure, still provide that service. So I hope we can investigate that. And I don't know if we've seen any proposals or applications for those kind of devices, but it would be great to get some support for that.
Yeah, the technology makes sense, that you would have something to buffer it and then immediately charge it, or charge it over time, and you can immediately discharge it. So That makes complete sense. Again, it goes with the other questions. Will you have a vehicle to grid as well? So we got to kind of choose which technology we're going to have. Will we have the virtual power plant, or will we have the buffering so that power can be more efficiently used and distributed in a more manageable manner? So all these technologies will develop, will be presented to us, will be technologies that we look at when we go out for bids. We're always very open to new technologies. We normally propose what technologies we think it's out there, but we also ask, what do you have to improve for us?
Yeah.
What do you have methods to make it easier? So yeah, we're very open to all the different technologies that can come up and can be used.
And I would suggest, I don't know if we have plans to do more GWP-funded public EV chargers, but to date they've been level 2. And I think level 2 works well in a home environment or an employment setting where your car is going to be in the same place for a long time. It's not ideal at the grocery store or at the movie theater. You're just not going to get enough range out of that. So now that we have the reach codes that are going to be putting chargers in people's homes, I think our investment in public charging should really focus on level 3 to support those longer trips. Or for our residents that don't have access to home charging, they could drive around all week, stop at a GWP level 3 charger for 10 minutes, and then charge up for the rest of the week. So,
Excellent point.
pivoting to the city fleet, I'm glad that we have an inventory of kind of what the scope of the total challenge is going to be. I don't know if this is part of that consultant's investigation or if it's something we need to take on, but I think there's probably some more details we want to know about each of those sub-fleets. And I'm just going to read through a few questions just kind of for the record. But I'd like to follow up next time we review this, we try and get answers on some of these things. So for each sub-fleet, what is the projected new load requirement? Different vehicles have different requirements. Where are the depot facilities, since the geography is going to impact the strain on our distribution grid? What is the existing capacity of the distribution system at each of those locations? What is the charging profile in terms of time of use for each of those subfleets? What is the adoption period for each subfleet between now and 2050? What are the criticality requirements or flexibility to respond to grid shortages? Some vehicles might be able to defer their departure for an hour, or maybe not, right? That would have a variable impact on how we serve them. And then what backup power or microgrid functions are provided at each location or might be provided at each location, right? Maybe for the B line, the solution is to have a microgrid at that yard so that they could generate their own power in a pinch. So I think those would all be great things for us to investigate, and those are all going to impact just how much of a burden these new vehicles put on our grid, and how we interact with other city departments in terms of what we expect them to do or require them to do as we electrify their fleets. And then I think the next level discussion is going to be looking outside the city family. There are lots of fleets in Glendale that are not operated by the municipal government. So this is the Postal Service, maybe an Amazon distribution center, maybe a plumber who has a fleet of 10 trucks. All of these fleets are going to have the same challenges, and they're going to come to us to provide them, grid solutions. So I think we should start thinking about those as well. And I don't know if we have a good handle on how to find those, or if that's something we want to do a study about, or we need to bring in a consultant to tell us, where are all the fleets with more than 5 vehicles or something like that. But it seems like something we ought to get ahead of so that we can plan for that.
Excellent point. Thank
So
you, sir.
with that, thank you very much. A great presentation. I'm really glad we're looking at this. And I hope this is something we come back to, at least once a year or so.
Our next item is 4C, 2024 Integrated Resource Plan.
Good afternoon. First off, Scott Mellon, Burbank Water, Burbank, that was bad. Oh, sorry about that. Glendale Water and Power, AGM of Power Management. I'm passing out an additional tidbit of information. We worked very hard to have a survey completed for you guys. In fact, we tried to ensure that it was done, which is why we had a late release for the slide presentation to you today. Unfortunately, we had a couple of additional survey responders from the STAG meeting, and this is additional information and the final numbers for that survey. I will get to that at the end of the presentation. But I wanted to make sure you had the information to look at. Kick this off. I'm, like I said, Scott Mellon. I'm here to talk about the 2024 Integrated Resource Plan and what we've accomplished to this date. So our objectives today will be covering the details involved with the IRP modeling process, including our assumptions and methodologies. We'll go over the 6 scenarios that we used to define the models and that covered our primary concerns of reliability, sustainability, and affordability. And finally, we'll seek the Commission's endorsement of the preferred scenario for, and a preferred scenario for that endorsement. So a little background. IRPs are generally described as a POU's electricity planning document. This is a comprehensive long-term planning document that utilizes our current understanding of technologies and forecasts to guide GWP with energy-related decisions. It includes a detailed analysis of the utility's current and future energy and capacity needs. It also includes strategies for meeting policy goals such as renewable energy and greenhouse gas reduction targets. It lays out the physical and operational constraints that are specific to utility. In our case, this is our transmission limitations, limited flexibility on the must-take versus must-run resources, as well as reserve margin constraints to maintain reliability. The IRP establishes the foundation for certain decisions affecting the city's resource choices and general priorities, such as meeting energy needs while ensuring system reliability, environmental sustainability, and cost effectiveness. And the IRP needs to be updated periodically to reflect changes in energy demand, technological advancements, and regulatory requirements. Under SB 350, POUs are required to develop and submit IRPs to the California Energy Commission at least every 5 years. Now, more generally speaking, though we do this every 5 years and we look out 20 years to project what it is we need, even though we release them every 5 years, we're looking at our plan every year to see whether or not it's heading in a particular direction, or if we need to make adjustments. So this plan is only representative of a snapshot in time. This is what we know, what we're working with right now to predict where we're headed. Transportation sector accounts for nearly 40% of statewide greenhouse gas emissions. POUs are urged to address procurement for transportation electrification, including planned programs and prioritization of investments to promote electrification. Developing an IRP is a time-consuming and data-intensive process. To facilitate the process, GWP teamed up with Ascend Analytics for data modeling and strategy and consulting to effectively engage the community and stakeholders. The Ascend Analytics original plan proposed to host 2 in-person town halls on the IRP. After feedback from City Council and the community, and through discussions with the Ascend Analytics and strategy consulting teams, the number of community town halls was increased to 4. To date, 3 community town halls have been held, and we are planning the 4th one, which is going to be November 16th at 6 o'clock. So those 3 that we had occurred Thursday, June 29th at Pacific Community Center, Monday, July 24th at Spar Heights Community Center, and Saturday, August 12th at Brand Studios. There were around 35 attendees at the first 2 meetings, while 27 attended the third. The third meeting was hosted on a weekend to provide flexibility for individuals unavailable to join during the week. Armenian and Spanish interpreters were available at all the meetings, and a recording of all town halls and the associated presentations are available on the website. So if you go to the GlendaleCalifornia.gov website and you can type in 2024 IRP, you can get access to all that information. The fourth and final, like I said, town hall meeting be held at Spar Heights Community Center on November 16th. The Stakeholder Technical Advisory Group is comprised of 14 individuals who live and/or work in Glendale, who can provide consistent and detailed community input to the IRP process. STAG was formed using a two-pronged approach. GWP sent invitations to 12 organizations who represented important segments of the Glendale community, including renters, homeowners, environmental advocates, the Latino and Armenian communities, and others. From these invitations, 8 organizations ultimately confirmed their interest in serving on STAG. Simultaneously, GWP issued an open call for STAG members with an application available on the GWP website and at the first IRP Community Town Hall. GWP received 22 applications from this process. Strategy and Consulting was responsible for reviewing the applications based on a set of pre-established and publicly transparent criteria listed on the GWP website. After applying these criteria, Strategy narrowed down to 7 top applicants who were extended invitations to join. The STAG size was reduced from 15 original members to 14 due to one accepted applicant's absence to the first STAG meeting and unresponsiveness to the communication requests. Strategy opted not to replace this member with another applicant, given any replacement member would already have missed the STAG orientation. Like the town halls, the number of STAG meetings was also increased from GWP's initial proposal from 4 to 6. STAG has met 6 times and just recently concluded on November 1st. It's worth noting that in addition to meetings, Strategy pursued other techniques to gather STAG input. We share information and answer questions. These included conducting surveys between meetings and hosting optional virtual STAG office hours for members to ask questions of the IRP team. From the beginning, STAG has shown strong interest in learning about GWP's system, its unique planning constraints, and resource options for the utility. Topics that have been continually raised across the meetings include transmission, customer solar, and GWP's progress towards city goals, virtual power plants, the feasibility and impacts of hydrogen use, GWP's transition to 100% clean energy, cost implications, and system reliability. To ensure the public could follow the content of STAG meetings, presentations, and anonymized minutes have been posted to the GWP IRP website. So it's the same website that you go to for the 2024 IRP and just add the word STAG. Let's get into the RPS requirements. So California's Renewable Portfolio Standard is a state policy that was established to promote the use of renewable energy sources for electricity generation. It requires load-serving entities to supply a certain percentage of its retail sales with renewable energy. Under SB 100, California has set ambitious goals for increasing renewable energy in its electricity mix for each compliance period. The key targets are 60% by 2030 and 100% clean by 2045. Lawmakers recently passed SB 1020, puts the state on the path of achieving 90% clean by 2035 and 95% by the end of 2040. Although the regulations around compliance for 1020 hasn't been set yet, GWP has already included the requirement in the IRP modeling. In addition to having sufficient renewable energy to meet the procurement obligation, the procurement must be classified into a portfolio content category or bucket and comply with the portfolio balance requirements. It sets a maximum and minimum of each bucket that can be used for compliance purposes. The legislature prefers bundled and directly delivered renewable energy over substituted energy, firmed and shaped renewable energy deliveries. However, the program also allows for bucket 3 or unbundled RECs up to 10% of procurement obligation to cover generation shortfalls and losses. To add complexity, the program requires at least 65% of the renewable portfolio must come from long-term contracts of 10 years or more. Historic carryover and excess procurement, this can be used to cover future compliance obligations. Over the years, GWP has banked RECs from previous years. Currently, GWP has about 491,000 RECs banked. through compliance period 2. Compliance period 3, which is 2017 to 2020, is still being verified by the CEC. Based on preliminary results, we're anticipating an additional 300,000 RECs for banking. All right. Now I'm going to introduce Brandon from Ascend, who's going to get into the modeling details.
Thanks, Scott. Turn this. Good evening. My name's Brandon Mock, and I work for Ascend Analytics, which is a consulting firm based in Boulder, Colorado. And we've been working with GWP for 5 or 6 years now, I think. We did the 2018 IRP. We're doing this IRP and some ad hoc studies in between. So just some notes on the modeling process. We do several different types of modeling when we do this. First, we want to look at the baseline. You know, what's in existence in GWP's portfolio of supply resources. And we want to kind of get a sense for when they will need new resources and what kind of resources they would need. And then we look at capacity expansion models. And a capacity expansion model is when you feed the information to our modeling software of the existing resources and any potential new resources that could be added to the mix. And by feeding that information in, which includes the physical characteristics of any of those resources and the cost of the resources, the model then will select kind of a basket of resources. So it will tell us the timing and the quantity of each resource type that should be added to GWP's portfolio in order to meet certain targets and guidelines that we've put into the model. For example, we might say you need to have at least 90% clean energy by the year 2035, or 100% clean by 2035, for example. So when we set those targets, we let the model tell us what the least cost solution would be to meet that target. Resource adequacy models, that's essentially looking at Glendale's load on an hour-to-hour basis over different years into the future, and then determining if the resources are adequate to meet that load probabilistically every hour of the year. So we just want to make sure you have enough resources to meet the load when you need to. And then finally, the production cost models. And that's where we get into how the system will operate into the future. We're looking at from 2024 out until 2045. And we just want to understand Grayson 9, how much does it operate? What are the carbon emissions, the ICEs, et cetera? When the solar comes online, you know, how much renewables are we going to have into the system? So I'll go over some of those outputs here in a bit. First, on the capacity expansion assumptions that we used in our models. It should be known that we constrained future resources to only clean energy resources, so geothermal, wind, solar. We did not allow any new natural gas builds in the model. We did allow hydrogen, long-duration storage, lithium-ion storage. So these were the types of resources that we said, okay, you can build this into the model. We just want to know what among these resources, what should we build and when should we build it? And the two main targets that Scott just mentioned, the 60% renewable portfolio standard target by 2030, as well as the 100% clean, either in 2035 or 2045, depending on the scenario that we're modeling. Transmission is one of those tricky aspects of the model because Glendale is so transmission constrained. We had to limit resources that it could build externally. And then once we get into the production cost models, we see how well it uses that transmission. So we may have to iterate between capacity expansion and the production cost models because we're not capturing that transmission explicitly in the capacity expansion. So the reason I'm giving you this background is just so you know, kind of, there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes and kind of builds up to what we're showing.
Brandon, just to clarify on hydrogen being listed there for capacity expansion, could
Yes.
you tell us what color of hydrogen or what variety of hydrogen
It's
is?
only green hydrogen, yes. So we're just talking about green here. I'm sorry. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, and then finally, the production cost models. I think I've mentioned enough about them, but essentially we have the three locations, I guess is the important thing in the production cost models. We're either looking at adding resources along the Southwest AC line or the Pacific DC line or locally in Glendale. One important caveat that we want to kind of clarify, I assume this group probably knows, but clean versus zero carbon emissions. Thanks for, So zero carbon emissions is essentially what it says. It's the very strict bar that you have no carbon emitting resources. Clean is almost carbon-free, but it is allowing for a small amount of natural gas generation. And that's how we interpret, and the other utilities that I've discussed this with, interprets the 1020 rule for 2045, SB 1020 rule in 2045, where utilities must hit that clean generation goal. It allows for roughly 10% of your generation to be natural gas or some fossil resource, as long as you're serving your full retail load with clean generation. So essentially, the way we model that is we say, you can keep your gas resources online, you just can't use them very much, but they're there for the important periods when you really need them. So the scenarios we looked at, for GWP, they presented the three scenarios up top. The scenario 1, which is clean by 2045, zero carbon by 2035 was scenario 2, and then scenario 3 is clean by 2045 with REC purchases for offsets. So essentially we're saying in the difference between scenario 1 and scenario 3 is that in scenario 1, you have to use all of the energy to serve your load, and you have to have enough of that to be clean to serve at least 90% of your load, and which would allow for 10% to be kind of covering those transmission and distribution losses in the model. In the scenario 3, we lower that bar, and we say you can buy offsets to cover an additional 10% of that energy. The STAG group also proposed 3 scenarios. They proposed a zero carbon by 2035 as well, but in their 2035 scenario, they had more rooftop solar, they had more customer-sided storage, and then they also had assumptions that the energy efficiency would play a bigger role. They suggested a clean by 2042, where it was mid demand response, mid behind the meter, and then there was some batteries as well that were installed. And then they proposed a zero carbon by 2040. And then as a clarifier, the way that it was communicated, and there was a misunderstanding in their second scenario, the clean by 2042. I interpreted as a zero carbon by 2042, and that's how we modeled it. So it is slightly different than what their initial proposal was. So the key findings, though, that I just wanted to point out that applied kind of broadly across all the scenarios, is that a transition to a clean energy system, it really relies on technical progress, because at the end of the day, Glendale needs to have more firm dispatchable resources locally in order to maintain a reliable system. And when you take away, when you limit the basket of resources to storage, green hydrogen, and wind and solar, we don't really have a lot of room for the energy or the less dense resources like wind and solar locally. We will talk about that the city solar is added to the model. We can improve some of the rooftop solar, but that utility scale solar is difficult to site in Glendale. So we were thinking of that as more of a remote resource, as well as wind generation would be more of a remote resource. But the long duration storage would provide that firm capacity that's dispatchable locally, as well as what I'm calling medium duration storage. And then we get to the clean, firm generation, which is dispatchable and generation that we can turn on and off as needed, turn it up and down as needed. So we're kind of limited there between the options of green hydrogen, carbon capture, renewable natural gas, and small modular reactors. And of those 4 options, We think that green hydrogen has the most promise to become commercially available. None of those are actually commercially available at this time, and there are various pilots for each of those options. But I just kind of want to expand a bit on the long duration storage and show you kind of what that means. So this is an image taken directly from Form Energy's website, and Form Energy is developing a 100-hour duration iron-air battery. They currently haven't produced any of these batteries, but they do have some pilots that they've started with utilities across the country, small pilots, maybe 1 megawatt. So we're talking early phase, lots of promise, but you know, there needs to be some technological progress going on there before we would see these actually in the grid in any meaningful level. ESS is another company that's developing 12-hour iron flow batteries. So it's similar to the Form batteries, but they're also in the pilot stage. They're also working with utilities and developing this technology. So there are some benefits. We think that once this technology matures and really comes about, it could provide fairly low-cost storage, and it's also easily added, scaled up. But the downsides are that it will have a lower efficiency, most likely, from everything I've been reading. Current lithium-ion batteries, for example, can be 85 to 90% efficient. So what I mean is that when they charge and discharge, they go through that full cycle, about 90% of the electricity comes out as compared to what goes in. Whereas these long duration storage resources will be lower than that, most likely. And they also require a lot of land. For that reason, we limited the amount of long duration storage that could be built in Glendale to 50 megawatts. And quite honestly, that may have been a rosy assumption, but that's kind of what we did in our models, just to because it would have been unreasonable to expect a lot of capacity from this resource. To give you some sense of the clean dispatchable generation, so hydrogen, once again, I should have put green hydrogen here, but that's essentially what we would power a combustion turbine or an internal combustion engine with. For example, the Wärtsiläs that will be installed soon can likely run on up to 25, maybe 30% green hydrogen blended with natural gas. But what we're really talking about here is going further into the future and converting this to run on 100% green hydrogen. So IPP, Intermountain Power, is going to be one of the first green hydrogen facilities in the world when it comes online. And that's going to be something we can really learn a lot as we observe and kind of monitor the progress there. They've, to my understanding, they've built the big caverns into the ground where they will be storing the hydrogen, and which is generated from wind power mainly and solar power as well. But I think the plan is mostly wind power will be generating that hydrogen locally at a big combined cycle natural gas generator. It will provide carbon-free. It will be fully dispatchable. As long as the carbon fuel is there, you can run it. Of course, if you run it too much, then you have to wait and kind of charge it up. So there will be some operational limits. There is a lot of losses, though, when we talk about going from wind power or solar to running electrolysis and generating that hydrogen and then burning that hydrogen in the generator. We're talking roughly a 1 to 3 ratio, if you will, like a 1 megawatt hour of energy that comes out in the final process of burning the hydrogen requires about 3 megawatt hours of renewable energy to go into it. So there is a loss, but you are able to really move that wind energy and that solar energy around to when you really need it. So there's a lot of upside as well. We do need more infrastructure. If you could imagine running the ICEs or Grayson 9 on hydrogen, we have to have a way to generate that hydrogen and get it to those plants. And the infrastructure is not it's not a secondary thought. It's a real challenge. The hydrogen molecules themselves are much smaller than natural gas, so the piping infrastructure can't be just reused from natural gas, for example. So there are a lot of thoughts that we have to kind of assume will happen when we're doing this type of modeling, to be honest. We're looking at, we're talking about 2035 to 2040 timeframe. So 15 or 17 years into the future. And if you look back 15 or 17 years, nobody was talking about green hydrogen then, right? So if you think about that progress since then, I'm not suggesting this won't be available. I'm just basically letting you know there's a lot of uncertainty around these projections right now. Small modular reactors, that is also kind of in its infancy. There's a NuScale as a company building the first SMR that I'm aware of, and in Idaho right now. But that's essentially taking what a large nuclear generator would be 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts in size. That's kind of how they used to build them. They're talking about building like maybe 80 megawatts to 300 megawatts is kind of that small modular reactor range now. And that's really going to make it much more modular, much smaller footprint, and it'll make it so that you can operate these more flexibly. You can ramp them up, you can ramp them down. Currently, nuclear power is really just turned on, and it's got an on and off switch. It doesn't really ramp up and down. So these are coming into the future. All projections currently suggest that they will be fairly expensive, which is why the green hydrogen was selected over the small modular reactors. Also, California policy is not really allowing it currently, but once again, this is something that could be procured out of state. So we considered it in our modeling, but it did not win out economics-wise. Another key finding, and this is just to kind of give you an illustration of the challenge. We affirm or a full transition to replacing Grayson 9, the ICEs, and Magnolia with firm, clean options is going to be difficult. And so over on this right side of the screen, I'm just showing in 2035, if we don't add anything, this is kind of the accounting of what kind of capacity we have in Glendale. And so the first line says the SWAC line, and that's assuming we're in a contingency situation. So we can, we're only counting what is firmly there. The SWAC line normally would provide 172 megawatts, but we're assuming that there's a partial outage right now. So we're looking at the worst case scenario. And that's really what we plan for, though, is the worst case scenario in this business. So that's 113 megawatts. And then if you walk down that list, we've got some demand response there, City Solar, Magnolia, the ICEs, et cetera. We come up to about 376 megawatts of total capacity that would likely be available during the peak load when transmission lines are out due to a fire, due to some other contingency on the system. So if we compare that to the load forecast, we're looking at about 416 megawatts of peak demand that we're estimating in 2035. And in the presentation before this one, it makes me want to rethink that number, to be honest. But that's kind of what we're assuming. That's based on the California Energy Commission's public forecast that we adjusted up based on a lot of the load that you saw in the previous presentation that's coming online over the next 5 to 7 years. So we add a lot of that, and we get about 416 megawatts by 2035. So we're already 40 megawatt deficit without adding any clean options there. So that's just kind of set up the challenge here. The key finding 3 is that really, all the models that we ran, it didn't matter what scenario we ran, really, they liked geothermal, storage, hydrogen, and wind. They weren't selecting a lot of solar, although we did add some solar to the many of the scenarios, kind of manually. And the reason they weren't selecting the solar is because the economics kind of have started to fall with solar in California. In the middle of the day, we're seeing a lot of curtailment from solar, and not necessarily in Glendale, but in the California system in general. And so the model compares the economics to the market. It's kind of comparing each resource. It's saying, if you build this resource, what is the market value of that energy? And solar is just, the market is kind of dips in the middle of the day when you're getting a lot of your solar generation. And so it wasn't panning out as much as wind was, which generates much more in that 9 or 7 o'clock until maybe midnight hour range. That's when you get a lot of value from your resources, because that's, if you look at the CAISO or California in general, that's where they're peaking in their net load. So I'm not going to go through this. This is more for your reading, but this is just a narrative of each of the scenarios as they were modeled and summary of the results. So really the important takeaways that I think come from this is that if we look at the results here, the GWP1, it's I think I tried to set this up. There's a lot of uncertainty in these numbers. We're trying to use a crystal ball to look 20-some years into the future. But what we did was we planned out the GWP1 to hit that 90% target. We ended up at 91% clean in 2035, and according to the third column. And it cost a little over half a billion dollars, and that's a net present value cost over 23 years. So that's what it would add by adding the supply resources necessary to hit that 91% in 2035, and then hold that out until 2045. The GWP scenario 2, which goes 100% clean by 2035, that was roughly 3 times, not quite 3 times, 2.7 times the cost I would estimate there, and it did go over 100% by 2035, and it reduces the carbon emissions a fair amount. But the difference, and it's really what you see in the rest of the scenarios, the main difference, the driver of that cost is, do you keep your natural gas resources online and run them less? Or do you replace them with green hydrogen resources and using the assumptions that we have in our model for the infrastructure upgrades, et cetera, to build all that green hydrogen out? If you do that, then you get the large numbers. If you assume that you can keep your gas resources, then you get the smaller numbers. And so that's kind of, sums up most of the results here. The STAG scenarios, if you look at STAG 1, that's similar to GWP. It came in at a bit lower cost. It had more excess generation. But that's because of the heavy growth in the rooftop solar that we were expecting in Glendale. We went from 3% of customers adopting rooftop solar today to 10% of customers adopting rooftop solar by 2028 in that STAG 1 model. So you had a lot of growth in solar, but we didn't count that towards meeting peak demand. The capacity value of that solar, we reduced that quite a bit. So what we ended up with was a lot of overgeneration. STAG 2 and STAG 3 were similar. We kind of adjusted the timing of when we would replace Grayson and the ICEs and Magnolia with hydrogen. And so that's kind of what determines the difference, is just the timing of the movement towards 100% clean in those bottom 3. To give you a kind of a sense of the timing of this, I'm showing the carbon emissions. I overlaid all the scenarios. And you can see that when you start out in 2024, they're all very similar. The only difference really then in 2024 is the assumptions with rooftop solar, from 2023 to 2024, and the energy efficiency, et cetera. So there's slight differences in 2024. And then we kind of move in lockstep until 2027 or so, when we start adding more renewable resources. That's the first year we said you can build more supply resources. And as we move along that path, we start to see some divergence until we get to 2035. And in 2035, that's when we close Magnolia, that's when we close Grayson, that's when we close the ICEs, and in 2 of those, in the scenarios that go clean in 2035. And so we see them drop to 0 at that time. The rest of the scenarios will continue on a bit, and then the timing-wise will determine when they drop off. The STAG 2 scenario, which is the yellow line, assumed Magnolia would retire in 2038, while Grayson and the ICEs would remain until 2042. And I didn't do that we did that because Magnolia was, we determined that was more economic to retire that a bit early. But what it does here is it shows you kind of a nice illustration of the amount of carbon emissions due to Magnolia. And the reason Magnolia is the challenge there is because Magnolia is a must-run unit. It's running at a minimum level around the clock in our models, whereas Grayson and the ICEs are allowed to turn off. So you can see on the yellow line in 2038 where the carbon emissions fall to close to zero and continue to 2042. It's because Magnolia goes away, and that shows you how much of an effect it has. Just looking kind of briefly at the rest of the slides, on the top, we're looking at clean and renewable generation. The point here is that we do have a variance of clean generation in all the scenarios, but they're all following very similar trends. The top left is the RPS, so that's the renewable portion, wind and solar and geo and biomass. And then the bottom right is the clean energy portion. And then finally, the costs. So we can see that the costs jump when you want to convert your internal resources. And that's kind of, yeah, I'm feeling like I'm saying the same story over and over here. So I'm going to just wrap this part up. Oh, I did add the cost with social cost of carbon added. And that does kind of narrow this gap a bit, but the challenge is that all of the scenarios reach 90% clean by 2035, so they're clean enough that when we add the social cost of carbon, it doesn't really squeeze them together too much, and they're all front-loaded in their carbon emissions. So that's kind of why the social cost of carbon doesn't really do as much as it doesn't change the story by a lot. I think it goes to you now. Thank you.
Okay, I recognize that was a lot of information to absorb. That's the kind of stuff that we've been absorbing all along. So we'll jump into the STAG. So the last STAG survey, and I mentioned this before, it was very impressive how involved the STAG members were in trying to understand our unique situation and really getting involved in providing information and input. I think this last STAG survey kind of tends to tell a story about how involved they were and how much insight they got into the very real problems that we're dealing with. So essentially, in an effort to sum up all the work and the personal perspectives of the STAG members, Strategen had the members respond to one final survey after the last STAG meeting. The survey asked for the following. Please choose your top 3 scenarios with no emphasis on which was highest in priority, just your top 3. And that's represented by the bar chart on the left. The results identified an equal preference in the top 3 for Glendale GWP 1, which is the California policy, and for STAG 2, which is zero emissions by 2042, with an emphasis on early adoption of long-duration energy storage. So I guess, even though I have that slide up there, you're probably better off referring to the handout I gave you. I apologize for it not having color. We had to print it out pretty quickly. So part of this was showing, it's a very basic analysis, right? I agree that just tell us your top 3 interests. And then we kind of identified of the top 3 interests for each individual, how were they weighted, essentially. And that's why there was definitely an interest in Glendale Water GWP 1, and why there was definitely an interest in STAG 2. And the third most interest was in STAG 3 scenario. The second question was, please allocate 100 points to those top 3 scenarios to gauge how strongly they preferred certain ones over others. The members could contribute points however they wanted, including putting all their points into a single scenario and applying zeros to the other 2. But they had to identify of those 3, how would they weight their interest in those 3. It differed slightly from the first survey, but in total, GWP received the most points with 530 points. There were definitely people that put all 100 in on this one, and there were definitely people that put all 100 in on STAG 1 also. This is a very polarizing concept, and we definitely had all sides represented in STAG. So I guess the way we kind of referred to it is anyone who was committed put all their points into a single choice, but others were more interested in having options, and that's why they spread their points around.
Scott, if I may, on the additional handout that you had, the numbers are different than what's on the slide that you're talking.
Yes, that's why I said the GWP 1 is actually 530 on the handout.
Okay.
Let's see if I can go over a couple other things. So GWP 1 was top choice for 6 members. By top choice, that was their number 1. That represents 55% of the STAG and 67% of the 9 people who put the scenario in their top 3. STAG 1 received the second most points with 375. One member allocated all 100 of their points at STAG 1. Although STAG 1 wasn't chosen by many members as being in their top 3 scenarios, the people who chose it strongly preferred it. So this scenario was the top choice for 5 members. 5 out of the 6 people who put it in their top 3 ultimately chose it as their top choice. While STAG 2 was tied with GWP 1 for the greatest number of people who put in their top 3, and only 2 members selected as their top scenario, suggesting STAG 2 was a backup option for most people. 3 of the people who selected STAG 2 as one of their top scenarios ultimately allocated no points to it because they put all 100 towards GWP 1. STAG 3 also turned out to be a good backup for many members. No one selected as their top choice. And GWP 2 and 3 were the least popular among the group. So while 5 people selected GWP 2 as one of their top scenarios, all of those people ultimately indicated STAG 1 as their preferred scenario. The scenario was not any member's top choice. Member comments suggested STAG 1's greatest emphasis on rooftop solar and other customer programs may have made that scenario more attractive to them. While 4 people selected GWP 3 as one of their top scenarios, 3 of those 4 people ultimately allocated all 100 of their points to GWP 1. Only 1 person allocated points to GWP. This scenario was not any member's top choice either. So, one of the most significant things we got out of this is that regardless of which of the surveys you were looking at or the individuals who were gauging this, there was interest in GWP 1, and it seemed to be weighted that way. So, I want to make it clear, GWP did not influence any of the STAG members to think any particular way. In fact, GWP only stepped forward to answer questions. Otherwise, it was Stratogen and Ascend that did the major interface. We are hands off because we wanted this to be as solid and transparent test and gathering of information as possible. But Glendale Water Power does prefer GWP 1 for meeting California policy for our IRP process. Like I said, we recognize this is a charged issue and that people are very much polarized by their concerns. However, this option enhances energy security and resilience. It offers cost-effective solutions when compared to the other scenarios. We have a comparison. You can save up to $1 billion over the 23-year net present value if you compare the lowest to the highest. It aligns with state RPS and emission standards. We're reaching 91% by 2035. That's pretty significant. And it has long-term viability and adaptable future innovations and changing energy technologies. That's all kind of wrapped into it. Ultimately, we think it's the best balance between reliability, sustainability, and affordability. So next steps. Like I said, we just had our last STAG meeting on November 1st. We're here tonight presenting to you this information and looking for an endorsement from the commission. We have our final town hall meeting on November 16th. We'll be posting the finalized IRP draft. So I said finalized, not final draft on the 17th. And we'll be looking to go to council. Right now we're scheduled for December 5th to get final approval on the full IRP. And that needs to be submitted final to the CEC by January 1st, 2024. Sorry about that date. Well, I'm available for any questions.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'm going to see if there's any questions.
Hi. In a few of the scenarios, the RPS figures exceed 100%. Can you explain what does that mean and what would we do with the surplus? Is that something we can sell RECs to recover costs? What would happen in that scenario?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, we could sell the excess power. Most likely, in our projections, though, the revenue from the sales will not be very high going out that far into the future, because if Glendale is overbuilding solar and wind, everybody else is overbuilding solar and wind. And so what we find in our modeling is that the market value of excess energy declines over time. The capacity value increases over time, but we're talking about kind of just over-generating during the middle of the day mostly, and then not being able to recoup a lot from it. But yeah, we would sell some of it.
So if I may, you've heard the term negative pricing. And during the day, when you overproduce in solar, you get negative pricing. And what that means is that if you have a megawatt that nobody needs, you pay somebody to take that megawatt. So if your asset costs $100 and you have to pay somebody $20, your asset theoretically is now $120. So it's a cost, it's not a savings, many times.
And some of that is connected to the time of use, the projected energy demand. Are we assuming that the time of use curve, the duck curve we're in now, continues, or through policy changes we might shift load to the middle of the day to take advantage of this projected surplus of solar? How is that accounted for in the model?
Yeah, so what we're assuming is, so actually I should reiterate, some of that excess generation is going to be absorbed by storage. And all of the scenarios have a fair amount of storage. So that is something that we put the raw kind of solar, wind, geothermal, et cetera, in the output. So if you see 120% or 130%, that's the aggregating all of that up. But if it charges the batteries, then we are not reducing that, if you will. So yeah, some of it's going to be shifted by storage to different times a day. Some of it would either be sold at low prices, or we could curtail it, right? If the price goes negative, minus $20 or so, it's likely that we would start then tapering down the resources.
Okay, thanks. And then in the stag scenarios, at least listed on slide 12, they describe high DR, high BTM solar, DER batteries. So these are various distributed energy resources. Are those included at all in the GWP scenarios, or just to a lesser degree? To
a lesser degree, yeah. We didn't have any distributed energy batteries in the Glendale scenarios. What we had was for DERs, the rooftop solar, as I mentioned, it's about 27 megawatts now, and it's spread out over about 3% of residential customers now. So we assumed that would basically double over between now and 2040. And so it would just kind of grow incrementally over that time.
That assumes our net metering policy stays as is?
That's the assumption, yeah.
I'm not sure I see why it needs to be such a bright line between the stag versions and the GWP versions, if there might be some way to thread the needle and have a little bit more of the distributed resources as part of the GWP plan. So I would be more comfortable supporting that one if I knew that it was amended to have more there. So we can at least explore the technologies, get more track record with them. I think as you showed in the carbon emissions chart, that all the scenarios are pretty similar for the next 10 years, but it's beyond that is when it really starts to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And it seems like the big, really capital-intensive items are what need a 5-10 year planning runway to implement. But some of the more customer-oriented, distributed stuff maybe can be implemented, with a 2 or 3 year lead time to develop a program or an incentive. So it seems like there's more flexibility there. So I'm curious generally for you guys to talk about, to what degree we have optionality in this, knowing that we do repeat this process every 5 years and we are always looking ahead on a rolling basis. What decisions might we be making now, knowing that we have an option to revise it in 5 years? And how do you feel about that?
I think the easiest answer to that question is that, we didn't start developing this RAP until this year, but we've made major strides in implementing programs long before that. So I don't think the IRP is tiring our hands and preventing us from implementing those future programs. We are looking at those on a yearly basis to see if they make sense and see how we can do it. And we're always reviewing the programs we have in place to see how they're performing. We have a lot of work to do as far as dollars we spent for what we've received, and we have an obligation to the customers to say, look, this is the program we've implemented, this is how it's performing. We have one of two directions to go on this program. We either have to really boost interest in it, or we have to put it aside and go someplace else. So just to address your concern, there's nothing stopping us from always looking at new technologies, implementing new plans. That's our goal, and we recognize why we have to do it.
And we do have some active projects to explore DER, and it's a consultant working on that now, right?
Yeah.
That's correct. And we're always looking for opportunities. So if we find a program that works, we'll just keep feeding that program. So it's not we're going to make a decision here and then this is going to be the roadmap and we're never going to look at anything. We're always looking for opportunity to find local resources for us to be able to either increase generation or decrease load at the vital times. So we're always looking at that. So I want to put you at rest on that thought process.
Good. Yeah, I wouldn't want someone to think that it's a black and white choice, right? We're kind of setting a 20-year plan, but we're going to be working, between now and then on lots of different things, right?
Very much so. Very much so. And, a lot of the technologies we're examining, we've examined a lot for this particular scenario, these particular scenarios, they still have a ways to go. And we're still looking at new things. But, if we go back 5 years, the stuff that we've implemented now and the stuff we're working towards now, that wasn't even a shadow. That was nothing. The stuff that we're seeing now is becoming more and more real as we move to the future. So our ability to adjust to those will become more and more real.
Another thing that strikes me is the big change between the two kind of categories is, are we tolerating the occasional burning of gas locally, or do we spend a lot of money to switch that to hydrogen? Is that kind of a really simplified choice,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And it seems like we always have some degree to throttle, at least Grayson, if not Magnolia, but to throttle our usage of Grayson down less and less and less, essentially to just to zero and have it on standby as an insurance policy. Is that truly an option that we could consider?
Yes, for Grayson number 9, and for the reciprocating internal combustion engine generators, yes. We can definitely do that. For Magnolia, just to give you some insight, we've been working with the Magnolia participants because we're co-owners. There's 6 different cities involved in that. We are actually working with them to find if there are seasonal events that we can shut down the unit and still make it viable. One caveat, of course, is the further we push into electrification, the more likely it is we'll be at least 2 coincident peak utility. Right now we only have 1 peak in the summer, but as we move into the winter, more electrification, and we may end up having 2 peaks. So there's this teeter-totter balance really going on between how hard we push on load growth for electrification and how hard we push to manage the resources that are available to us.
And that second peak would be from heating homes during cold weather using heat pump technology?
Heat pump technology, water heaters, electric dryers, ovens. Yeah, as in the winter, you may want to cook more inside, who knows?
Sure. Even with that, it would be more efficient from a carbon emissions perspective to burn natural gas at Magnolia, generate electricity, and then use that electricity at home to heat your home than to burn natural gas in your home?
Absolutely. And I would say far more safe. We have all the mechanisms built on all these units to control the emissions to the best of our ability, which is not necessarily the case in your home.
Yeah, I think to me that's really important that we can choose to use not Magnolia, but Grayson as little as we want. And there's a significant capacity value of having it for that worst case scenario, really high heat wave, or if there's some contingency event. But we're not obligated to use it all the time if we can develop alternatives.
Yes.
Right.
It's an interesting point. On number 9 unit, it's LM6000. We extract value of it as it's just sitting there doing nothing. It's what they call non-spinning reserve. So there's value there, and we sit there with 50 megawatts just waiting for a contingency event, and you just have them turn it on, and in 10 minutes they're producing 50 megawatts. So there's a lot of value in having thermal generation locally. One of the caveats to the new Wärtsilä engines is the capacity factor is only going to be 14%. So even if we had a rogue operator that wanted to run it, he or she could only run it 14% capacity factor. So we're building stops in there to prevent us from over relying on thermal generation.
And it also seems like we're kind of getting to the diminishing marginal returns or the increasing marginal cost, that getting from 90 to 100% clean energy costs a lot more than getting from 80 to 90%, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I think the adage is from 0 to 90, that cost is the same that you're going to have to go from 90 to 100. That's the cost.
And then just in terms of the total emissions on the chart from the different scenarios, that is cumulative over the 20-year life of the plan, right? So that's why none of them show 0, because all of them have some emissions as we taper off. Okay, great, thank you.
I just want to comment, I've been involved with the Grayson Repower for a long time, and one of the reasons we did those smaller ICE engines, because we could throttle them when we need them, we can use the ones we want. We have 4 engines, so we can run one of them, or 4 of them, depending on 3.
Yeah, 3 now.
Okay. So that was something that was part of the design of Grayson, is to minimize the use of them as much as and as Commissioner Lowry said, it was as an insurance, at least in my mind, insurance for should we need it, it's there, we could use it. So with regards to the points that the STAG members assigned, it seems like GWP1 got 530 and STAG1 got 375. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. So with regards to the naming of these choices, GWP1, so it makes it sound like it's something GWP1 proposed, and STAG1 is something that's the STAG proposed. Maybe you can tell us about how it came about, those naming of choices?
Sure. So you're exactly right. The GWP models were the 3 scenarios that GWP staff set up because we had certain obligations we had to meet. The first one was meeting California policy. The second one was meeting the goals of council by 2035. And the third one was trying to find the most affordable methodology to still meet California policy. And that came in where we applied RECs and then ran units a little bit more, so we generated more and didn't have to get renewable energy as much. Those were definitely ours. We had set them aside. And originally, we had proposed with Ascend that they would run 2 models for the STAG. STAG would come up with these scenarios, and they would get to decide what they want to put in the model. So STAG chose all the 3 STAG models. They chose through consensus. Then after they started developing 2 of them, they really wanted a third point to get a better understanding of what kind of influence it had in the overall model structure. So we said, okay, we'll run a 3rd model for you. So we added a 3rd. And yes, all we did was let them identify what was most important to them, and then we adjusted in the models. From
me reading these responses to them, even though this is what they asked for, what they suggested, ultimately they gave more points to the GWP1. Is that correct?
Yes, ultimately more of the people gave more points to the GWP1.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Got a couple of questions on the weighted responses here. If you just took a vote on the top 2, how do you think that would
We talked about that. None of us are statisticians, but we had to consult a statistician to get an understanding of that. And Stratogen talked to somebody about whether or not it was a better idea to do 2 or 3 to make sure that we had a better understanding of it. And my understanding of it is that if you went with 2, it would have been more polarized as far as people would have committed to one or the other possibly. But they weren't really sure that it would give a good understanding of the system needs. So they said, let's do 3 to make sure that people could put all their information together at once. And that's kind of why we ended up splitting the survey out into 2 separate surveys. Because they originally were just going to do 1 survey to get a sense of it. But we split them out to allow the point structure to come through also. So you had them pick their top 3, which kind of grouped them in a sense, but then they had to weight it. And when they weighted it, their minds changed quite a bit. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it just looks to me like you've got the GWP 1, and then you've got, if you add up all the points for the next 3, it far exceeds the 1. I mean, if you look at
for the next 3
Stag
stags.
1, 2, and 3, you've got 375, 180, and 135. It far exceeds the GWP 1, and that's where my question comes from. I just, I'm just questioning whether how this would look if you went back to the Stag members and said, we've got these top two. And, to Alex's point, they seem different, very different. And is there anything that we could do to maybe, blend those together somewhat as far as the recommendations? And from what I got here, I'm unsure as to what's really in GWP 1 and what's in Stag 1. What are the lineups of technologies? I mean, just overall, where are the big costs? I mean, you've got a significant cost to Stag 1, and in this environment where we're talking about rate increases and stuff, I think this is very important. But what's in the what are the big costs in the Stag 1, and what are the big costs in GWP 1?
Sure, I can answer that. So in Stag 1, it's the green hydrogen conversion from natural gas to green hydrogen for Magnolia, Grayson 9, and the ICE units. That's probably 2/3 of the total cost right there. Also, both of them involve adding geothermal energy to the mix. So they both added 50 megawatts of geothermal, but the timing was different. In Stag 1, the geothermal was added in the late 2020, so right around 2028, I think. Whereas in GWP 1, the geothermal was added a little bit at 2029, but then it was delayed a bit until 2035 to add a little bit more. And geothermal is not very cheap. It's we're projecting it's over $100 a megawatt hour right now compared to, let's say, solar, which is about $40 megawatt hour. Mark's looking at me, maybe it's a little bit more than that now, I'm not sure. Wind might be $50 a megawatt hour. So geothermal it's nice, firm, kind of flat generation, so it's more valuable and it costs more. And those are the two kind of primary differences for as far as big supply resources. The Stag 1, it also had, as I mentioned, it got up to 10% of residents adding net energy metered solar to their rooftops by 2028. So we projected that to be 90 megawatts of solar added in Glendale by 2028, and there's a cost to that. Although that wasn't a huge cost, but that was also one kind of differentiator between the two.
Were those individual homes, or did that include city rooftop solar? Or
so in the
did that
model,
solar
it's
look like?
indifferent. We just modeled it as fixed solar in Glendale. So whether it's on a commercial roof or a residential roof, it doesn't make any difference in the model. We were simply wanting to model a growth in distributed energy resources that met the 10%. There's a city council goal of getting 10% rooftop solar, I think, in Glendale. So we were modeling that.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question on the solar modeling? Did we consider what the impact would be to changing the net energy metering policy to more align with the CPUC 3.0 policy?
So it's not necessarily an economic model in the sense that you're talking where I can change some policy and then I get an output like that. We have to make an assumption in our modeling. We say if it's net energy metered, we expect rooftop solar to grow with a certain trajectory. If for what you were saying, if we assume non-NEM, then we would have to make that assumption before our model and then feed that assumption into our model.
The reason I ask is I wonder if, from a cost to the utility perspective, if we change the rules and now it's only economic to install solar if you're also putting in storage at your home, do we as the utility get kind of free benefits of that because customers now are going to be putting in that storage if they want to go solar? Is that something that we might be able to put a value on here? And maybe there's some gray area in between these two versions that could help resolve?
The one point I wanted to make was we're basically at NEM 1.0, which is probably the most incentivized program there is.
It's very generous, thank you.
No problem. We are considering 3.0 though, and 3.0 is less incentivizing. So yes, it may have less of an impact on the cost implication, but it's less likely for people to jump into it because there's less incentive there. So it's kind of the counterbalance, right? So I think Ascend was working from the situation that we're in right now.
And what you're suggesting is looking at different sensitivities around distributed energy resources. I mean, with infinite time, I would have looked at all of those, and done more. But we just had a finite amount of time to come up with our modeling results, so this is what we were able to do in that amount of time.
Yeah, and I guess there's probably a version. I know there are probably people who'd be very upset if we change the NEM rules. Yeah. But there's could be a version that's essentially revenue neutral or cost neutral to the client, to the customer, where you don't get NEM 1.0 anymore, but will massively subsidize your home energy storage system. And now that's a resource for the utility and that the whole community can benefit from.
And there's a big problem with subsidizing people to put storage on their facility, because the people that aren't capable of doing that would have to pay for that subsidy. And Prop 26 prevents that from happening.
Well, I think as long as the stored energy is a community resource that the utility has priority access to and is not just personally for that home, I would imagine that's probably okay. I'm thinking of what's happening in Vermont, where Green Mountain Power has essentially decided that their solution to the reliability challenge is to put a power wall in every customer's home. That's a totally different approach than what we're going after, which is to build more generation and transmission capacity. But there's a different way to go about that. So anyway, I didn't mean to diverge, Commissioner Lowry.
Regarding the hydrogen, back to the hydrogen, on GWP 1 and STAG 1, can you give me a ballpark figure as to how much of the $535 million and the $1.8 billion, how much of that is hydrogen? Just ballpark.
It's probably close to $1 billion of it is hydrogen, I would guess. It's a little under 900 million.
Okay. And on the GWP 1, how much of that is hydrogen?
We did not assume any hydrogen in GWP 1.
Okay.
So I think it's important to point out a couple things about why we talk about hydrogen. One of the most important things for our system is to be able to have access to dispatchable, firm energy. In these scenarios, one of the things that really stood out is basically we have this hole in our system about 40 megawatts. You saw the slide, we talked about it. That needs to be filled with something. But we also have an ability to maintain reserves. We have a requirement to maintain our interchange with our balancing authority. We have a need to ensure that we can respond to system swings. When we talk about geothermal and we talk about hydrogen, yes, they're expensive, but they're expensive because they do exactly what we need when we need them to do it. Geothermal is one of those things, it's a base load, it's there around the clock, it's supplied, that takes a chunk out of our load, we're good to go. Hydrogen, that's that variation. We have solar that's in the middle of the day, and we have wind that's everywhere else. So we have to have something that's going to be managing and is dispatchable to accommodate the fluctuations throughout the system. Batteries can do some of that, I agree. Batteries rely on energy from an alternate source first. They are storage, they are not generators. So we need to have something that will be there to back us up.
And the hydrogen and geothermal would both be reliant on transmission connections? The IPP?
Not the hydrogen would be, we had considered hydrogen both in system and possibly out system for IPP.
But geothermal is strictly out of system? And for the hydrogen in system, there's a lot of technology risk to that, right? I mean, none of that exists at the moment. I know we got some big press conference about, LA's a hydrogen hub now.
Yes.
Whatever that means. I mean, can you explain what does that mean, and
Sure.
what are other local utilities doing? I think LADWP made some big announcement around hydrogen for their thermal generation.
So I'll start with big picture first. President Biden announced that he had $8 billion available to develop 8 hydrogen hubs. Originally, it was going to be 4 hydrogen hubs, and that was all out of the IRA. He stretched it out into 8. Each one's going to get about $1 billion. One of those hydrogen hubs is California, not LA. All of California is considered a hydrogen hub. They still have to figure out how they're going to build the distribution system, what's going to be the primary sources of the hydrogen collection, and things like that. I will say, in the IRA, if you read it, one of the things they lean towards on hydrogen hubs is diversity of the hydrogen fuel system. So while we are focused primarily on green hydrogen, the IRA is focused on supplying hydrogen. It is not specific to green. And it is looking for places that can make hydrogen in any form to get the hub established. So LA, yes, is pushing very hard. LA has that in their STLRP. They have it in their IRP. All very focused in on developing hydrogen in the basin.
LA 100 is predicated on converting 2,600 megawatts of thermal generation miraculously to hydrogen, green hydrogen. I was up in the Sacramento Delta, looking at the health of the Delta, and going from Orville all the way down to Glendale to see how our water. We got a lot of problems with water, and hydrogen's made from water. So we would have to actually think about the electrolysis of water in a desert and how we're going to manage not only our water supply, but the water supply to create green hydrogen. It's a daunting task, especially after seeing what's going on in the Delta.
And in the same way you mentioned that batteries are not generating energy, they're just storing it. Could you also think of hydrogen in the same way? I mean, it's essentially a
Yes.
movable battery that stores, solar or wind energy and then can be consumed somewhere else at a different time?
That's primarily how the Intermountain Power Project, the renewable project, is going to work, right? It's taking the renewable resources, converting them into hydrogen, storing the hydrogen, using it at the peak times when you really need the energy, and it's dispatchable.
So is the model for hydrogen at Grayson theoretically that there's a pipeline that brings hydrogen into Grayson, or that we're creating hydrogen at Grayson and storing it and burning? Like what is that?
I could probably spend the next half hour talking to you about the different types of hydrogen technology. There's, bring it in as a liquid, both a cryogenic form or an ammonia. You can pump it in, you can mix it, you do a pre-mix in natural gas and deliver it. They're running through all these ideas right now.
Good enough.
And just to maybe, aside from Los Angeles, the Northern California NCPA, Northern California Public Power Agencies, is also looking at partial conversion of hydrogen as well in their Lodi Energy Center. So they've considered that in their IRP, and they're seriously looking at that. I don't know if they're as serious as LA, but they're seriously looking into that. And we've looked at a couple other utilities that are considering hydrogen as well. It's not unique here, but when you think about 2035, if you don't want natural gas and you don't, there's just not a lot of options these days. It's a challenging problem to solve.
And if we were going to do that hydrogen conversion by 2035, we would essentially have to start, pick a technology now and start building it in order for it to be online by then?
To kind of bridge that whole concept, I'm sure you've all heard of Angeles Link, Southern California Gas's initiative for hydrogen. They have a rudimentary plan. Basically, conceptually, they're looking at creating hydrogen to the Tehachapi area by getting solar arrays out there and then pumping the hydrogen into the basin. That's all on paper. First thing they have to do is get a rate case to ensure that they have funds to pay for all that, and that's their first hurdle that they have to get through. So as far as where we are in development of a technology, SoCalGas seems to be one of the first at the gate, but they haven't gotten through the gate yet.
Is there any solar, is there any solar in GWP1?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, there's a little solar, yes.
A little?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't recall exactly how much. I'd have to look, but.
If I may, we have a solar project in Eland that hasn't been producing yet. So that's a large solar project. And we also have what they call a Skylar project, which was up to 50 megawatts an hour. So that would have been about 75 megawatts of solar, which is huge. It's a huge amount of solar. So we do have solar. I don't want anybody to think that we don't have solar. We do have it. It's just taking a little bit more time to get. You can't get any release of the panels. They're in the LA Harbor. It's taking forever, a year or two.
Yeah, it was a 1-year delay on the Eland project, so we do have that planned in the model.
Yeah, those are both projects in the model, baked into the model, and then there's additional solar added on top of that. Yes.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I would just say there's a lot of interest in rooftop solar in this community, and even if it doesn't pan out in the model, I think it's something that needs to be part of our offering here. The other thing that kind of struck me when you first started was GWP1 being the selection. It's like we're just meeting the 2045 mandate, and that's not real. That doesn't sound real progressive. And the other thing that I would be concerned about is what we've just seen with Grayson. We went through a period of 3 years where we go from 5 engines down to 3, and the cost during that time, as well documented, the cost of money and everything went up, and our costs exploded. And when we choose a plan that goes to 2045, I think we're at greater risk of incurring something like that happening again. And I just think we need to keep that in mind.
So I think it's important you brought up the term progressive. When I look at California, California is one of the most progressive states in the nation. I think we can all agree on that, especially when it comes to renewable energy. That in mind, we already have very progressive policies pushing us in the direction. Now, I understand the council has other more aggressive, progressive policies. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with setting up aspirational goals and attempting to achieve them, and that's what we're doing. And again, there's nothing that's going to prevent us from doing better than what we're aiming for. But from a cost perspective, from a needs and an impact to some of our lowest income people, customers in the system, we do have to consider the impact to those and how we socialize the cost, how it gets spread around. I agree that we have programs that maybe we can push a little harder on. I agree that there's probably incentives we can try and find a way to implement, but incentives aren't coming out of my pocket as an employee of Glendale Water and Power. The incentives are going to come out of the customer's pocket and go into another customer's pocket. So we have to make sure that we are doing right by everyone.
I think those are great points. And the question to that is, when we've got 20 or 22,000 homes and, people can put a solar system on their home, how do we make that equal for the person that's in the multifamily when they've got, a rooftop that's smaller than this building, perhaps? That's a tough thing.
I agree. And I know there's been a lot of talk about community solar and community storage. I know that finding a footprint to place that to offset some of the cost and have people be able to feed in, it's more cost effective for a utility to try and find a larger facility to do that and decrease the cost for that low income customer than it is to build these smaller facilities at a higher cost. So it's not that we aren't looking. We are looking for opportunity wherever we can, both in system and outside of system, but we also want to always be aware of the implications of some of these projects on the ratepayers.
Is there any way to incentivize a large tenant like a Home Depot or a Target or somebody like that, where they're looking at opening a store in Glendale and say, we've already got the building built, but it's empty? And is there any, because states obviously do this when they're looking to attract businesses. And just wondering if there's anything we can do on a local level.
We're working on a power purchase agreement concept within a distribution system. It's tying us buying energy from a resource and the interchange agreement that would be tied into that and the electrical system work that need to be going into that, folding that all into a single package so that if we get someone like a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Walmart that has large property that they're building this on, that we might be able to incentivize them to put solar or a solar canopy over their parking lot and then sell it into us at a fixed rate that they can get back over 20 years. The reason why we're looking at the PPA concept is it's easier for someone to recognize the return on investment by doing that. Our FIT program doesn't really work. It's not something that people are enticed to do. So if we do something like a PPA and we establish a price and they can get these rates coming in or the revenue coming in over a 20-year period, that might be something we can incentivize these large companies to really jump into.
Great. Thank you, Scott.
No problem.
We do have one comment card, Jack Walworth, if you want to come up and speak.
President Jesmadarian, we also have 2 phone calls.
Okay.
Hi, I'll be quick because I know I only have 3 minutes here. I just want to say, first of all, I was a member of the STAG, but these are my opinions. These are just notes I took while this presentation was taking place. First of all, the results up there represent, if you look at it, about over 50% of those results prefer less than 2045, the California policy. I think it was 53% plus another 5% of the GWP 2, which was also 2035. So if you look at those percentages, you can see that even the STAG, which was not necessarily representative of the city of Glendale, it was 75% male, mostly over 50. And I know They made an honest effort to get people. It wasn't easy, but 3 women, 3 people of color, it was certainly not representative of the city. I'll just run through my points because they're just sort of notes that I took as we were going. I don't think we've really taken a serious look at the volatility of gas prices here. They're, you know, when they did these scenarios or the modeling, it seems like they were looking at historical prices, and you know that is not going to be the case over the next 5 years, let alone 20. Okay, let's see. Stag 1. I know that there was talk about, you know, we're going to be paying to give away solar. Well, obviously, we need to put in more storage. So let's invest in storage rather than give it away for extra money. There was talk about closing Magnolia. I was just curious about, I mean, that's a group of 6 different communities who makes that determination. They said that we weren't influenced as STAG members. Well, they gave us dinner every week. I think they did influence. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. The town hall input wasn't clearly identified. I think, again, this comes back to the representation of STAG versus the town hall representation. Question about how nimble GWP can be with the long-term power purchase agreements versus you know, new technological developments. I mean, GWP's a big beast, and you know, making these moves is hard. Just throwing that out there. The runoff of the top 2 that Chris mentioned, I think was a good idea. I mean, I'd be interested to see the result of something like that. Cost 2/3 hydrogen, that's 10+ years away. 2/3 of that big cost, I mean, a lot can change in that 10 years. Okay, let's see. Better than 2045, I talked about that. Now, hydrogen uses old technology. It's basically converting the natural gas plants into hydrogen plants, right? I think we really have to think outside the box a little more. I mean, the solar and the storage are really the future, the long-term duration storage that Brandon went into, I think, is key. And that's the end of my notes. Thank you very much.
Our first caller is Jackie Gish. Jackie, you're on the air. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Couple of questions and a couple of comments. So I want to back up what Jack said about more storage to take up the solar, and what Alex said to shift the load to the middle of the day. I mean, this thought of throwing away the solar that's being produced and not either storing it or incentivize people to do their cars, to charge their cars in the middle of the day. Do whatever you can to make the load overlap the generation of all this solar. By not adding more storage to Stag 1, I think the benefit of all this rooftop solar has not been taken into account at all, or hardly at all. I was distressed to see that there was only 10 megawatts of solar in 2035 on one of the charts. That's just a few buildings. Nobody seems to be talking about solar at the landfill, which is the largest single plot of land probably that Glendale has. And that should be in the model somewhere. I'm wondering how much the dollar chart influenced the STAG voting, and whether that could be brought down significantly if more storage were added instead of putting this enormous cost of hydrogen in there. And then a couple of questions. Is biogas included in clean? I know it's renewable. Is it included in clean and or zero carbon? And a second question is, was any kind of thought or put in about putting in new transmission? There's lots of land elsewhere than in Glendale. And if we could get transmission, I know we'd have to do it in conjunction with LA and stuff like that, but it's always the thing that we can't talk about it because, you know, it's too expensive. But that ultimately is the solution. And instead of spending money on clean hydrogen or dirty hydrogen or whatever, and looking at the transmission problem should be part of these exercises. I think that's it. Thanks.
Our next caller is Grant Michaels. Grant, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name is Grant Michaels, and I represented the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council on the STAG. While I understand the limitations of the modeling for the different scenarios, during this process, I expressed my desire for more flexibility and consideration of additional variables in the models. Listening to your discussion on this item and the one previous to it, you share some of those same concerns of wanting to have flexibility to be able to look at what may be real-world impacts and considerations within these models. I do understand that these models are looking to the future and limit the variables that can be considered as a budgetary means. So while I appreciate the process of the modeling and the 20-year planning, much of the analysis of the different scenarios was virtually identical for the first 5 years, very similar for 10, and differences emerged beyond that based on the choices of technologies and variables that are clearly uncertain. Through the choices in STAG, I supported the more progressive models. The logic behind that is the uncertainty in those future scenarios. By selecting and acting on those progressive initiatives rather than putting off investment and planning, GWP and the city will be better prepared for the uncertain future. I understand that GWP, as a course of their general management, will be looking at the opportunities, looking at the IRP as a plan, and taking advantage of changes, new technologies as things come about. But in selecting a scenario and a plan, I encourage you to consider the more progressive scenarios. Thank you.
We do have one more caller. Gustavo Moreno, you have 5 minutes. You're on the air.
GWP commissioners, public officials, and esteemed members of the public. My name is Gustavo Moreno. I am an individual member of the Stakeholder Technical Advisory Group, or STAG, working on the 2024 GWP Integrated Resource Plan. My opinions are my own, and I do not represent the full group, GWP, or its consultants. The STAG represented a group of stakeholders and leaders from community-based organizations that immerse themselves on Glendale's energy situation. After over 2 months of multiple meetings and robust dialogue, the STAG members have voted for their preferred choice. GW1 is the clear winner. The selection received 17% more points than the second option and 62% more than the third option. GWP won the majority of support since it enhances energy security and resilience, offers cost-effective solutions compared to other scenarios, aligns with state renewable portfolio standards and emission mandates, and offers long-term viability and is adaptable to future innovations and changing energy technologies. GWP1 is GWP's best path forward. And for the reasons stated, I hope that all of you can endorse GWP1 California policy as well. Thank you. I respectfully yield the balance of my time.
We do have another caller, Kate Unger. You're on the air. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you very much, everybody. The interesting presentation. A lot of work went into the IRP. I certainly appreciate the difficulties. Just a couple of quick thoughts I wanted to say. I don't really understand why Stag 1 was looking at rooftop solar in isolation rather than together with storage, if it was meant to recognize the City Council's mandate of 100% by 2035, because that resolution specifically said that the solar was supposed to be combined with storage to allow it to address peak needs. I also agree with the observations by others and Commissioner Fay about the need for filling in the load curve, allowing for solar during the middle of the day to be used through load flexibility. I think that demand side solutions like that are much less expensive. It seems like a lot of the cost of the non-natural gas scenarios is driven by hydrogen, and more emphasis on demand side and local solar and storage together could significantly reduce those costs. I do think that the scenario survey of the STAG is not truly representative of what the community or even members of the STAG would like. And I urge the city to try to get us off natural gas entirely as soon as possible, because the planet is in desperate need of a switch away from fossil fuels to completely zero carbon as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
President Jasmine, we don't have any more calls.
Thank you, Catalina. Mark, do you have us, that you want us to concur with GWP1?
I find it ironic that we call it GWP1. I think it's just coincidence that it's the first option. It's really the California option, right? So I think it's not in our best interest to restrict us to a point where we can't operate if we were to provide a more restrictive IRP. Then we would have to follow that IRP. If we couldn't follow the IRP, then we would be violating our own IRP. If we had the California policy and we decided to move forward faster, we could still do that, but we couldn't do it the other way around. So that's the reason why we suggest Glendale 1, and we're very hypersensitive to price, especially given the light that the bonding of the new facilities that we've been trying to do for the last 7 years or 6 years got away from us, and it's going to hurt the ratepayers. I think that we owe it to them to try to keep it as inexpensive as possible, knowing that in 5 years that we're going to be doing an IRP again. And if something were to happen inside the 5 years, we would still be looking at that option. And if that dramatically changed our portfolio, we would come back and we would hire Brandon and Ascend to run a new IRP, because it doesn't say you have to do it every 5 years. You have to do it at least every 5 years. When your portfolio substantially changes from the last IRP, you have to run a new IRP. So I think that's where we want to be. We would rather be at the California policy, and us have the direction to move forward faster if we can, but to be cognizant of price.
Mark, is there a way that every year you do a overview of what's happened and modify the IRP, adapt the IRP as you're going along until you get to your 5-year period again, where you have to relook at the IRP, instead of going through a huge process? You know, as things change, you can make stricter measures.
Sure.
Is that something you can do?
Sure, and that's a great comment. We wanted to readjust the IRP a couple of years ago when we thought that we were going to get the 5 Wärtsilä engines, and once we got the engines to repower Grayson, then we were going to then run the IRP again to see, these are your givens. The givens have changed. Now what do we have to do? And that's our goal, is to always do that. I think it's a great idea to update or to at least notify GWP Commission and Council on a yearly basis to find out where we are. But the technologies don't change in a year. Really, the way electricity is being produced is the same way it's been produced over the 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's the cost that's changing. It's the methodology in which we're going to burn hydrogen now, or how the batteries are starting to get a little bit better. But we've had batteries for a long time. So I think it's a good idea for us to be able to do that. But I can guarantee you that if anything substantially changes in our portfolio, we will be coming back to a new IRP. And typically that IRP then goes in conjunction with a COSA.
Do I have any motions from?
I'd like to make some comments and just thank you for all the work that Ascend and the GWP staff have made in preparing this IRP. I attended one of those community meetings. It was informative. It was interesting to see all the different perspectives of all the people who attended these meetings, and I appreciate the effort that the STAG members put in meeting and coming to their suggestions here or votes. We have to keep in mind this is an IRP just for the next 5 years. In 5 years' time, we're going to reevaluate these things. And from some of the suggestions I'm seeing in STAG 1, at least, it sounds like we're talking about conversion to hydrogen of Magnolia and Grayson, if I'm correct, which these technologies are not even available for the next 5 years. So we can't do it even if we wanted. So based on what I'm seeing, the reasonable choice, based on staff recommendation, based on the input of the STAG, well, I understand some members don't like the decision, but from practical perspective of suggesting a STAG 1 where realistically in the next 5 years we can't even do it even if we wanted, doesn't make too much sense to me. So with that in mind, I'm inclined to support the California 1 suggestion, but I'd like to hear my fellow commissioners' opinion on it.
I kind of wish there was another option. If we kind of break these down, there's the continue burning gas at Grayson or convert Grayson to hydrogen, and this is variations on when that happens, right? Is there some other version where we consciously attempt to burn as little gas as Grayson as possible, but we don't undertake the capital investment to switch it to be hydrogen compatible?
That'd be the first one, right? I believe that's the first one. Yeah, that would be GWP 1. Sorry, California 1. I like that better, actually. It is that because that's our focus anyways. We already have a restricted capability with the word. We're planning on the Wardzillas being available to us. I'm going to preface that. We're planning on the 75 megawatts worth of batteries being available to us. And we already know that Unit 9 is there and that Magnolia is there. So the only thing that must run right now is Magnolia, and that's at our minimum output. All the rest doesn't have to run unless there's an absolute need for it. So and that's how we gauge it. There's a cost associated to it. There's a need for it. And I can tell you with only 3 Wardzillas as an option and the need for them to be flexible and more so in Q3 when we have the peak loads, we're most likely not going to run those things unless it's absolutely necessary, and we're looking at the Q3 timeframe for that. Number 9 is there for reserves, just like Wardzillas would be. Number 9 is it's not really in the money, so it's not like we can make money off of it. So it really depends on what's going on in the market. Obviously, we might have an incentive to assist the rest of California when we have these big load swings and things like that. I mean, that's in our best interest to take on that load because it's our energy anyways. But we're already incentivized to keep the units on as little as possible.
And so does that mean that utility agrees we would rather have a customer have a battery in their home if that made the difference between having to flip on the gas engines or not?
I guess it depends on the type of load that they are and when the battery is going to be available.
I mean, if that battery is available to the utility
If it's available to the utility, yes. So, I mean, you brought up a good point. There's a large-scale discussion going on about it being able to manage chargers, being able to manage batteries, being able to manage load. All those require infrastructure. All those require control and knowledge. So I personally, as an engineer and having a need to control things anyways, have a big interest in understanding how we can do this. I know the technology exists. I know communication protocols exist. What we don't have is we don't have the equipment to put in the right places to do that. And we have to make requirements. We have people are going to install chargers, or they're going to install batteries, or they're going to install controllable load. Those things must be able to talk to us. Right now, we don't have those requirements. So it would require some changes, and it would require an understanding from the customers that this is a must-have, not a like-to-have.
Yeah, I'd rather see us invest in those kind of smart, flexible resources than building another billion-dollar infrastructure thing, that we might get wrong, right? That might be the wrong pick.
Yeah.
So, I guess that's my comment is, if we can retain the flexibility to invest in lots of things, but have the commitment that we will continue doing those, which I take on your good faith that we'll continue to do.
I think you guys will keep us to task.
And then just to be crystal clear, the scenario one, the recommended scenario, does it or does it not meet the city council policy?
The California One policy does not meet the council goals.
Okay.
I'm careful not to use the word policy for that item.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to say thank you to everybody that was involved in this process. I know, the undertaking of this is really difficult, and it's easy for, me to stand up here and throw darts at you, and you're the people that have to make it work. But also I want to thank the people that come and sit through our meetings, and, the STAG members that took their time and obviously put their hearts into it, because you can tell with the comments of the caller and Jack and others that they were very, very invested. The point I come to with this is I feel like I have only one choice. When I look at STAG 1 and California 1, STAG 1, you basically, it has $1 billion in there for a technology that, would need to start building now. And it's not available. I mean, to Roland's point, it's not available. So I really don't know why. I mean, that's a really big number. That scares me a lot, the 1.8, billion. I don't know why the model came up with a solution that is not really buildable now. So I don't feel like that is an option for me. And my overall feeling is 2045 is too slow. I think we need to have more urgency and try and do the things that, not that we're not, but try and do the things that the viable technologies that are here today. And I mean, I don't even know how you would estimate the cost of hydrogen. I mean, it's such an immature technology. I mean, right now, it's basically, we're hauling it around in trucks like we do gasoline. And I mean, all that infrastructure and everything's got to be built. And I don't have a lot of faith in that, that number, because I think it's so hard to do. But that's where I'm at on this.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to provide a motion?
President Jasmine, while this item is not agendized as an action item for the commission to make a formal motion to the city council, Mr. Young and Mr. Mellon can certainly include the commission's recommendations and preferences in their report to the city council. So the commission is more than welcome to make a motion and vote on it, but I just wanted to note that it's not agendized as an action item, so there won't be a published official motion that'll be attached to the council report.
Okay.
Well, I mean, as a board here, we are here to assist city council. And while we can't, if it's not agendized as a motion, we can certainly pass on our recommendation. City Council relies on us as much as possible, to a certain extent, I would believe, given all the other issues they have to deal with, is to listen to us, or at least hear our opinion on it. It would be a disservice to this board and to just say, okay, just send it to City Council without giving some sort of a opinion on it. So with that, I would recommend the California One option. I think it's the right balance between the goals which we're trying to reach, which is renewable energy. And even Stag One, the reason they're talking at hydrogen gas is because they have to meet that renewable energy requirement, and that's what's the best that they can do given the environment that we are operating in. It's either that or putting the whole mountain over there with solar panel. I don't know if that's possible even. So with that in mind, I would suggest this commission recommend California One over to City Council, and obviously City Council will hear the opinions of everybody, ours included, and can decide accordingly.
Do I have a second?
You can certainly take a vote, but it won't be a formal motion in the manner that we would have a motion prepared and we would attach it to the council report. However, certainly if the commission has one preference, the commission can vote on that preference and the report will reflect it.
I mean, I think you could, it's better to flush out these issues in public, but you can certainly obviously communicate to the council member who appointed each one of us. When I communicated my recommendation, I expressed my thinking behind it, and so that other people can comment, and if I'm wrong, I'd like to take it back, right? So that's my recommendation, and I welcome others to submit their recommendations any way they want.
I have no recommendation.
Okay. Do you have a recommendation, or would you?
No, I don't have a recommendation either. I think that the STAG process is much more involved than this one, and so I wouldn't want to introduce my own opinion here in lieu of that. So.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and recommend California One as well. And in case something changes drastically, the IRP can be redone before 5 years. Okay. So next item on the agenda?
Our next item is item 5, agenda forecast.
Okay. We've only got 2 items on the forecast: legislative update and water conservation drought update. Would commissioners like to add anything else to either December or the months after?
So December, I may not be here, so that's why I'm not going to add anything. But maybe for January, and it's something that I've brought up with regards to these community meetings and whether GWP staff should be in charge of encouraging and getting as many people to these community meetings as possible. When we're doing this IRPs every 5 years, we're hiring consultants, and the consultants begin drawing in people. And I was of the opinion that maybe if Glendale staff does that, because they would know more about the city, doing it over and over a year, I'd like to have some sort of a matrix that in the first time we did IRP, the participants were 27 people, but the next time we did IRP 5 years later, it was 100 people. And so that we get a broad participation, and I think Glendale staff would be more involved in that process than just a consultant that we might hire. But I certainly want to hear feedback from Glendale GWP staff, whether that's something beneficial or not. And maybe that's a good thing to discuss in January, not at this time.
Sure. I think that's a great idea. We're in the process of staffing up my upper level staff. Once we do that, one of the main priorities is to figure out a way to communicate with the public and dialogue with the public on a consistent basis, whether you're going to homeowners associations or you're going to any other community type of groups, just so that we can continuously talk. And then we're also thinking about broadening GWP's responsibility to take control over community outreach for various things, whether it's water or power management and things like that, to staff up that group and have a more robust group. But we could do that in January.
I'd like to place that on the agenda then.
For December, can we make sure the legislative update includes the latest from Washington on funding for clean energy projects? And maybe that's a joint presentation from the power group and the legislative group?
Yes, sir.
Can we also have items on capital programs for both power and water, replacements, rehab, all of that type thing, where the city is with that? Did we just do that?
I think I'm having a senior moment. Didn't we do that a month or two ago? I mean, if that's the case, I'd be more than happy to do it again.
6 months from now or so, yeah.
I would like to say, I was speaking with someone a couple days ago, and they told me that they applied for a solar permit, and it was approved in like 3 weeks. And I think that's hats off to the people that are involved in that. I think that's, a great turnaround, and it's a big improvement, and thank you to the city.
Thank you very much, because we very rarely do we get thank yous for that. We usually get, why are you sitting on it for so long? But with ADUs and all the things that are happening with electrification, there's just so many more permits that are being processed, and the team is working nonstop on it. But I'll let them know that you acknowledge them, and we'll be working on reducing that time even further.
Okay, anything else?
President Jasmine, just to make sure, based on the comments that the commission made in the beginning of this meeting, would the commission still be desirous to have oral communications as item number 3 before the reports, and then a quick discussion on the reports about having it permanently in the future?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next item is,
Our next item 6, adjournment.
okay, and I would like to adjourn this meeting in memory of Larry Morehouse. So, condolences to his family.
Thank you.